Hello everybody and welcome to a very special Ashes Reborn stream where I have gone out to the beautiful Ashes community and found a member who was willing to come on and talk to me about the newest releases, Hope and Dimona, so that I can hopefully have some tips and some expertise that I can use to crush Zach in later matches. So we've got Chaos Theory here, has done some incredible videos for Ashes on YouTube and is always on our Discord and the Ashes channel, Ashes Discord, and anywhere seemingly where Ashes is being played. So we're gonna hop in, we're gonna talk about Hope and Dimona, how to build these decks, and kind of what you should be looking at when you even approach the idea of deck building, particularly when a new release happens. So let me get right in here. Welcome everybody, glad to have you. And let's see if we can make this thing work. We are here. All right, Jeremy, how are you?
Hey, how's it going, Steven?
It's good. I'm gonna dial in your audio a little bit. And in order to do that,
right.
first of all, I think chat's just absolutely jacked that you're here. So we're all happy.
I too am jacked. I'm excited. This is fun.
I want to push this out to you guys in the chat. Let me know. I'm actually gonna give you my little bubble down here. Look at that. You got two of me. Let me know how the audio is between Jeremy and I. Make sure that it's kind of like nicely leveled. It looks pretty good on my indicator here, but I can't really monitor it very well. So if you're listening to this, if Jeremy needs to go up or down, let us know. But otherwise, let's dive right in. First of all, Jeremy, can you just kind of tell us how you came about being involved in Ashes? Because you're like one of those high-level players. I think of you in the same way that I think about people like Impossible German and Philly Cheese and Monk, who again I always make jokes about is the singular. I think he's running the servers for Ashteki in his house because I've never seen his name not on the screen
right.
there. How did you come into Ashes?
So I started playing 1.0 when the game released back in 2015, I think it was. And I bought the first couple expansions and I enjoyed the game, but we didn't really have a community for it at the time. And so I didn't get much playtime in, and it kind of just fell off my radar as some new games came out. We ended up playing a lot of Star Wars Destiny and L5R after that, and so on. So it kind of fell off my radar, and I didn't realize actually how many expansions the game actually got. So like when I heard it was, coming back after being dead for a while, I was like, well, cool, this is really exciting. I might be able to actually play it now. And looked up the list of the expansions. I was like, wow, this game really went on for a while, like kind of huge. But I started playing, and we, with COVID happening, we very quickly realized that if we were going to play this game, it was probably going to be in an online environment. And me and my friend Jason, who's Impossible German in the chat, we just started playing the game together and playing online. And I was like, you know what? I've been doing streaming stuff for my church for a little while. I want to make content for this. There's an opportunity here. So I don't know, man. I fell in head over heels for Reborn. It is without a doubt one of my favorite games of all time, and it's just really fun to make content for it and be a part of the community.
Man, love to hear that. So let's just start with the fundamentals, right? Let's start with from the bottom. We did that Introducing Ashes series, and we kind of talked about this idea of going into the constructed environment fairly quickly. I know that that's been suggested a lot in the greater Ashes community, that like the precons are, not really certainly not the full Ashes experience, but also like a pretty limited Ashes experience, and the deck building really opens up the gameplay and also just your understanding of how many options there are. But as we've also said before, like it's so open that it can be really overwhelming. So when you look at a new Phoenixborn, we've got Hope and Dimona here, but when you look at a new Phoenixborn, what is it that how are you starting to think about what deck construction is going to look like?
Yeah, so like you said, the precons are limited. With the first 5 mechanic, you have this giant palette that you can, paint on essentially. The precons, they make that palette a lot smaller. You don't have as many options. There's not those one-off like tech cards that you can put into your deck in first 5 in certain matchups. You kind of have your suggested first 5. Maybe you can branch out from there a little, but not as much. So it just doesn't really highlight a lot of the strengths of the game. But when you get into constructed, like you said, it can be really overwhelming because there's just so many options. When I look at new Phoenixborn, there's a lot to think about here. There's the Phoenixborn stats. Their spellboard and battlefield in particular will determine a lot of the direction that you can go in building them. And then of course you want to build around their ability because their ability is something that's always on the table. In a lot of ways, the ability is more important than the signature card because it's something that you don't have to draw into it. You don't have to first 5 it. It's just there. So when I look at new Phoenixborn, I'm immediately kind of drawn to what are their stats, what is their special ability, and kind of going from there.
Do you feel the pressure or the need to, when you see a Battlefield 7 on Dimona, for instance, does that signal to you okay, I need to use all of that? I need all 7 slots to be utilized? Or, is it sometimes, even with your Battlefield 7, you might run 2 big unit strategies or something?
I don't think it's you need to. It's more of just, this is what I have. This is my upper limit. This is what I have to work with. 7 Battlefield is pretty solid. I would say, if you're looking over at the range of Phoenixborn, 4 is the smallest, 10 is the highest, and there's only 1 with a 10 Battlefield. So really 7's kind of there in the middle, upper middle, and it's really solid. What that tells me when I see Battlefield 7 Spellboard 3 is that, okay, you're not going to have as many spell options for books. You can play max 3. You're probably going to be with a 7-3 stat line. You may not have room for utility ready spells. You might just be focusing purely on books. But Battlefield 7 does let you go a bit wider. So it kind of influences your card choices a little bit, and what types of builds you might want to do. But at the same time, I've seen Koji decks, Koji being the Phoenixborn with a 10 Battlefield, 3 spellboard, who they just use knights, just tons of going tall with big units, because his ability or his signature card is just really, really good with big units.
Yeah.
So it is kind of wide open. You can do a lot.
Yeah.
But
with Dimona, the thing that strikes me too, and we can just hone in on Dimona here real quick and start a deeper conversation about that. So even with that Battlefield 7, that, says to me, okay, cheap allies, but Ashes is the kind of game where you're on 5 cards and there's really no recovery mechanism for expensive stuff, costs a lot of resources, but also the card cost is baked into that. So as your units get cheaper, your card costs effectively get higher. And so if I'm going to play a bunch of allies that are really cheap, I need to have access to more cards to bring as much value to the board as these kind of compact value-based knights, like you say. So then is it the kind of thing where if I'm going to be playing a lot of allies, then I'm going to have to start looking at card draw and these kinds of mechanics. Do those things marry? Are there concepts like that tend to marry together?
Yes, sometimes. I think if you look in Dimona's precon, actually, and my cards, I'll just show you, this is how they are organized.
Beautiful.
So it's kind of hard to find them. But is Bricebot pulling the cards up?
Bricebot is not pulling the cards up. No, we don't have that technology yet.
Bricebot's offline. No.
I'll show you my organization, though. Look at that.
There we go.
We're so similar.
We're very similar, yeah. There's a card in Dimona's precon called Reinforce,
I've got
that
it
it's a
right
ready
here.
spell. Yeah. So it's a ready spell that searches the top 5 cards of your deck for an ally or an alteration, and then
Yeah.
you could put it into play, ignoring its main or side cost. That to me is a perfect example of like what you're talking about, where if you're wanting to lean into a very ally-centric build, which I think that Dimona does, this is a nice way to have a ready spell that can synergize with that. Can pull the allies that you need when you need them. But yeah, I think the other thing is like ceremonial. A lot of ally-centric builds tend to want to put some ceremonial in their deck because you can use your discard pile as your hand, you know?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Pay some health, pull an ally in. And I think if you look at like some of the, like James is another good example. 7/3 as well. His special ability, just pay health to search your deck, like tutor an ally. So yeah, I think there is that to an extent, but I think you can generally fit enough dice sync into your spell board that you won't be able to play everything out. Even if you're running a lot of cheap allies, I think you'll eventually like you'll play all 5 cards and you'll generally be out of your dice. You'll have to make some decisions there.
Right. I like the idea of ceremonial, like kind of powering that onboard cheap ally strategy. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so when you look at Dimona, let's start from the ground up. So anybody following along at home too, Ashes.live is a really good resource if you just want to type in a card name as they come up. And follow along. But we've got Dimona Odinstar, so like you said, 7 battlefield, 3 spellboard. Health, I think generally is kind of, it's not necessarily a build around kind of thing. It's just more of how fast or how slow does this have to happen?
Yeah. Generally speaking, health is like, it does matter. There was a time in the Ashes community where a lot of us were thinking like, well, health totals are, it's like a nice icing on the cake, but they're not like something you need to think about all the time. But lately, there's been a lot of very hyper aggressive decks in the meta, including Brennan, that can, the 2 health really matters a lot when you're facing down a very aggressive deck. So health can matter in that way. 16 is a bit on the lower side. So you might need to think about healing or some kind of preventative, like preventing damage in some way against those super aggressive decks. But I would say, looking at Hope, there's a lot of subtlety to Hope that I think might be lost if you're not super familiar with how Ashes works. So we'd already talked about like 7 battlefield, 3 spellboard, 16 health. One thing that I think is really interesting about Dimona is that there's a lot of basic costs in her deck. So if you look at like her ability promote, it costs 2 basic. And that's like an always online thing, right? And then her signature card, Ray Recruit, also 3 basic. So that's a big basic sink too. And that means that you can be very flexible with your dice spread in Dimona. You can run a lot of different colors, right?
Yeah.
Normally, if you overload your dice a bit too much, you can be ending up in a situation where you can't play all the cards that you want. And Dimona has like a nice like a safety valve for that. You can always spend your dice on these abilities in the signature card.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. The other, go ahead.
I was that for newer players or kind of those newer mid-level deck builders, I think what you're saying is really relevant. And what it actually looks like, right, is like, let's just say Dimona's ability, you've got these 2 basics. So on any given roll, and particularly any given draw up of 5 cards, if you're spread out across, let's say, even 4 dice types, like there's going to be times where you don't have any cards that your sympathy die is kind of built to take advantage of. And so it's sitting there, can't play anything out of your hand effectively. But having these basic costs on the board means that they're never like a dead die. Like you can always spend it on something, like you're saying. So I do think that's super relevant. That's a good point to make.
Yeah, and it's something to think about in deck building when you don't have this, when you don't have a big basic. We call it basic sync in the Ashes community. Is like cards that allow you to spend basics for them are they have a lot of value just in the fact that they're flexible. Like one
Yeah.
of my favorite cards, Conjurations, is False Demon, and uh, it's just incredibly valuable to pay a class and a basic for a 2/2 with a come into play effect. Um, that's just really good. Like it's not like flashy or anything, but it's extremely flexible, especially in first fives. Monk just said drink. We were joking before the stream started that like every time I talk about False Demon is a shot because I love that card.
So good, love it.
Yeah.
I think we are gonna have a. I think there's cocktails being made in the other room too, so we will have a chance to
Nice.
actually implement that game.
Yeah.
So you've got the basics, you've got the Wayward Knight. I mean, obviously, if you look at that ability, exhausted allies you control are what you're targeting here. So your brain immediately goes to, my brain immediately goes to, what allies can I play that gain value when they come into play, that are great value whenever they do something to exhaust, and that can then become the mounted Empyrean mount unit as well. I don't know how many of those units exist. I haven't looked. I assume you might have an idea of if that's a good direction to go with Dimona or not. But is there anything beyond kind of that level of thinking that you need to consider with this ability on Dimona?
Yeah. So one thing that's really key with Dimona is like there's been mounts, the mount mechanic in this game before, which you see with the Archosaurus mount and the Ceratosaurus mount. But what you haven't seen before is that her ability lets you mount an exhausted ally. Normally, it's unexhausted allies, which that kind of changes your evaluation, like what units you want to put into play. Like with Dimona, you can actually use those units, get value out of them, and then still mount them afterward.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's there's that to consider. One more thing I want to say real quick before we move too far along into this is what the basic cost too is. It also makes her very mill resilient because you're not meditating as much. So, like I think Dimona is like maybe one of the best anti-mill Phoenixborn in the game right now because she has so many ways to spend dice without caring what side they're on. And her Wayward Knight also shuffles an ally back into your deck from your discard pile. And just in general, she's getting more use out of the units that are already on her board. So she doesn't have to play as many of them.
Yeah.
So she's extremely mill resilient in that way, which is really nice because some people in our community are pioneering some pretty strong mill decks right now. So
every time I see Monk and the Ash Techies playing those birds and like it seems like nothing's happening, but then I think he's actually winning. Is that a mill deck basically in summary?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can go about it, but the more popular one recently, the one that Monk's been kind of pioneering is it's very focused on like ready spells and stuff like Orchid Dove and Purge and using Kneel to exhaust the board and trying to outlast you with main actions so that they can play Safeguard and not take any damage from the next attack. So yeah, it's very wall up, stall type of thing, and you do have to think about that and have answers for that in your deck building.
The old wall install, one of my, of course, favorites. As you know, that's my favorite way to play.
Oh yes, absolutely.
One of the things with Dimona's ability that here we go, cocktail is here. What is it?
Oh, nice.
Bijou.
Oh, Bijou. Wow, that's classic. Let's pull it from the 1800s.
It means jewel.
It means jewel. Thank you, Ray. This and more coming in Covenant 3.0. You can even know what the name of the cocktail means.
I have a Gold Rush here.
Oh my gosh.
This would be really fun. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Absolutely.
That Gold Rush is a good drink. Love that.
It's simple and effective.
Yeah. Okay, so on Dimona, one thing before we get away from it, that exhausted thing is actually, as you said, quite relevant. So that actually removes a little bit of the burden from allies with come into play effects, because at a certain point, they're just standard allies. They can gain value by doing standard ally things and then still become the Empyrean mount. So whereas those normal mounts were really wanting a come into play and then mount situation, these allies can come into play and like be normal. And then if you get the chance, you can also turn them into a horse.
Yeah, so with other mounts, you generally want something cheap, something with the come into play, like you said, because you can't use it once it's in play. You also kind of want to get it mounted as fast as you possibly can, because those cheap allies are easy to remove. So your opponent can disrupt your mount strategy. And like in first 5, round 1, which we'll probably touch on this at some point, but like round 1 and round 2 onward are like completely different like phases of the game in my mind. And in round 1, if you only have access to so many cards, your discard pile's not full of allies yet, you don't have your spell board set up, you really need everything to be firing on all cylinders. And if someone disrupts your game plan with an ice trap, kills your mountable ally, well, now your Ceratosaurus mount's not doing anything this first round, and you'll fall behind really fast.
Yeah.
So Dimona being able to just like she mounts, I've seen Dimona players mount knights all the time. Like that's unheard of with other mounts, just because it's just too expensive and you don't get the value you want. But she can just mount anything, which is really cool.
Is there, are we, maybe this is too degenerate, but are we ever looking at a game plan where we're putting a big ally out? We'll call them the knights for ease, even though Rayward Knight is right here in front of me. We put that out, we get some value out of it, we either block or we attack or we use a big ability or something, or at least just gain advantage from the presence. Then we mount that thing, and then we destroy our own mount to get it back out so that it can do its thing again. Because like 3 life is a lot to just like clear off of your own board, but there's plenty of cards in the game that sacrifice units you control to do this or that.
Yeah. So actually that touches on a really key part of Ashes Reborn in general, is dealing with clogged battlefields and making sure that you're making the most of your battlefield. Like more often than not, you will run into your battlefield limits pretty quickly. Like you'll run out of space and you need to utilize that space the best you can. Like especially Phoenixborn with smaller battlefield sizes, which, in a minute we'll talk about Hope and why that's a big problem for her or for them. But being able to clear battlefield slots and then reuse them is key, and having cards that self-clear. A lot of times symmetrical AoE effects that blow up your own board in other games would be a downside. In Ashes, it's actually kind of a plus.
Yeah, I've been on the receiving end of that.
Nature's Wrath. Yeah, Nature's Wrath and stuff like that card is so good because it does everything you want with very little downside. As long as you get value out of those units before they go, you're happy to see them go because you get to play more stuff. So
makes total sense.
But yeah, Dimona being able to turn an exhausted unit into an unexhausted one, in the same battlefield slot without having to clear anything that's a big plus for her.
Okay, so then we kind of are starting to zoom in on where we might start looking as deck builders on a Dimona Odinstar approach. So we know we want to utilize allies to utilize this main ability. We know we have a broad, all the dice types are available, and we can go pretty rainbow with our dice if we want to. Not like pretty rainbow, like attractive rainbow, but like very rainbow. Pretty rainbow. Rainbow. We know those things can happen. We know we have a limited spell board, so with an ally heavy strategy, we might actually be able to get away with some support down there if we have enough allies to power like the battlefield side of the game. And then we might even look at effects that like have big allies use these mounts, just keep this constant big number pressure, and then when these mounts leave play, big ally comes back in, and you kind of, I could even see a rush strategy with this, where like you put out something big, you swing with it, you mount it, you swing for 3, you destroy the mount, you swing with the big thing again. Those things seem available. Anywhere else that your brain is going with Dimona, just before we even look at any of the cards, where you'd start kind of ideating?
Yeah, so I think there's been 2 sort of directions I've seen the community taking Dimona that I think can like inform which way we want to go here too. Just seeing what was already been successful. One of them is utilizing Fallen, because you don't have a ton of spellboard room, so Fallen stacks multiple Fallen books, and when an ally dies, they get a token, and then you can, with one action, summon multiple Fallen at once. The nice thing about that with Dimona is that you want to get her allies off the board so that you take away her mount pressure. But if you're doing that, and you're feeding the Fallen, so it puts you in a catch-22. And so I would say cards with like ally death synergy are really good because it's a deterrent. It lets you do what you want to do, or you pay the consequences. Which is, I think that's one direction that's been going that's really nice. Another one that I think is really good for Dimona, like what we were talking about before, is with her being so mill resilient, that uniquely enables her to play a mill game plan if she wants to, or at least a long game. She can play for the long game without worrying about fatigue. So I think you can look at cards like Enchanted Violinist, which I think is an amazing Dimona card, because it's a cheap 1-die ally you put into play. You want to exhaust it immediately and deal a damage, kill something, and mill a card. But then, like, normally that's all that card does, and that's really good by itself. Enchanted Violinist is a great ally, but then being able to have this double threat of being able to mount it and then swing with a 3/3, and controlling battlefield so well. I think we didn't really touch on this, but Empyrean Mount has an ability that essentially you force your opponent to block with a certain unit when it attacks. So, you get to. She's all about dictating how the fights happen.
Yeah.
With Empyrean Mount and with Rayward being able to charge in and attack the turn it's played. So I think playing sort of a long game value, like turn over turn, just like making value trades, milling, like stuff like that. Maybe spin down, like stuff like Dreamlock Mage or something, like spinning down your opponent's dice so that they have to meditate, and you're sitting over here like, I don't care if I meditate. Like, Dimona has a lot of late game potential, I think.
That makes a ton of sense, and I actually kind of missed it on the mount that your ability to destroy this conjuration has built it right in, right? As long as your opponent has a 3-attack unit, you can hopefully make a trade on that unit and then get your big ally back into play without having to worry about like kind of the big sacrifice mechanics or those kinds of things that otherwise are usually used for that purpose. And I think you hit on one thing, just kind of is very subtle, but it's worth calling out as a general deck building conversation within Ashes too. That when you see really good Ashes decks, I think they're doing what you're talking about, which is I'm playing into the strength of the Phoenixborn, but then I'm asking the question, like, what is really good against that strength? So what's really good against Dimona? Well, it's like, well, if they kill all my allies, if they remove all my allies, I won't be able to use this Empyrean Mount ability. Maybe they have to sit on dice because they don't have anything to do with them. So you're asking the question immediately, like, how do I attack the counter game plan that my opponent might bring to the table against this primary game plan that Dimona is trying to do? And that's when really good Ashes decks, I think, or really good decks of any game start to pop out.
Yeah, it's especially relevant in this game because this game, you can very quickly get, you can get really lost in the rabbit hole of like countering the counters of the counters and stuff, especially with first 5. Like, and something else to think about too. For Team Covenant, it's not as relevant because you guys play with the closed list format, but the premier Ashes tournament format right now that's online is an open list format, and that completely changes how you have to build decks. Like, There's some really interesting considerations about like fainting or having pivots of first fives, so that when your opponent looks at your list, they don't know exactly what you're doing. I recently, well, I guess it wasn't very recent ago, but we had the Shuffle Bus Invitational, which is like the closest thing we have to a world championship right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I went 4-1 with a Herald list in that tournament. That the big draw of the deck is that when you're looking at it, it has two primary opens, and they're extremely different openings that require very different tools to counter. One is sort of like a swarming, like go wide strategy, and the other is like double knights, so you're kind of going tall.
Mm-hmm.
And the cool thing about it is that you have so many main actions to stall with that you can put off which one you picked for a very long time. 6 or 7 turns sometimes before your opponent knows which one you picked. And so there's a lot of strength in that in open list format that in closed list it doesn't matter quite as much. They just have to look at your dice and decide what they think you're doing based on that. But in open list, and they see what all your cards are, if you don't have like a first 5 pivot, then you can end up in a situation where they can easily call you out.
Yeah.
And tuck against you. So
that's some next level Ashes, man. This thing goes so deep. I swear that the first 5 is like the hurt. You think it's deep and it's great, and then the first 5 is like sitting there like, yes, you're playing Ashes, ha ha ha. And then you finally understand what the first 5 actually means for deck construction and psychology, especially when you add an open list format to it, and it's like, oh well, this is a whole new element of the game that I haven't even ever thought about. Amazing.
Dude, I've gone deep in the tank pre-game when I have like a big, like a top cut match coming up in Shuffle Bus, and Impossible German and I will be like in our Discord just sitting there like for 2 hours going back and forth on like, well, if I first 5 this and he first 5s this, or like, what if I first 5 this to like counter this, but then what if he plays this? And dude, open list it's kind of fries your brain a little bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. Brian Boy saying game outside the game. Am I right, fellas? Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, This is it. This kind of stuff you can talk about forever, which is really critical for games to be successful. All right. Hey, let's move on to Hope. Let's give the same assessment and just kind of general ideas that come to mind with Hope. I'll take what I've learned and kick things off here with the 6 battlefield, 5 spell board. So that's kind of right down the line. Seems like we have a basic.
It is, yeah.
We have a basic ability as well, a side action. I love seeing side actions on Phoenixborn. That's one of my favorite things. I feel like that opens up a lot of very good interactions with these main actions suddenly coming from nowhere. So let's look at it. 1 basic, choose a conjuration with a life value of 1 that you control, of course. Place a copy of it onto your battlefield. At the end of this turn, destroy that copy. Which, let me tell you, right out of the gate, this looks very, very good. It looks very good. Like even just like, let's say a conjuration that's a 2/1 or something. Side action copy, swing in with both of them on the field. Very basic use case there, but otherwise, that's just shenanigans. I mean, you can copy something that they didn't expect, and then boom, here it is. I imagine if we look at conjurations with 1 life, which is probably where a lot of people start with this Phoenixborn, we might find some that are a natural fit for this ability. Anything else we should know about how we should be considering Hope?
Sure. Yeah, so spoiler alert, Duplicate is very strong. It's really, really good. And yeah, I mean, you're right in that you start looking at 1 life conjurations pretty quickly when you're looking to build Hope. One thing that's maybe not immediately obvious is, there's a lot of great 1 life conjurations that cost 1 die that have good effects, like Lightbringer that I have here. Like, that's a fantastic one. Just come into play. Your opponent has to declare attack as their next action. Having access to 2 Lightbringers off a single book, that's good.
It's super good.
I would say that's pretty solid. However, that's not where Hope's power really lies. Those are some good ones, but where her power really lies, or where their power really lies, is that when you're getting like units that are balanced around 2 costs that have 1 health, or 3 costs that have 1 health, and you're basically cheating out an extra 1 for 1 die, that's where it gets really spicy. So there's a couple of units. There's actually 3 that I was researching and that have been played recently competitively, that really stand out as like these are great units to build around with Hope. One of them is the one that I built around, and that is, actually, let me find it here, Vampire Bat Swarm. So that's a 2 cost 2/1, which is not fantastic stats for 2 dice. But it has 2 things going for it here. One is that it can protect itself. Whenever it's destroyed, you can spend a ceremonial or a sympathy and put it right back on the field.
Oh.
Which is great if you're trying to build up a large battlefield and swing all at once with them to trigger a card like Void Pulse. And it gets Group Tactics 1, so it actually becomes a 3/1 whenever it attacks with 3 or more units. So Vampire Bat Swarm's excellent. And you get, like, again, a 2-die unit for essentially 1 die, which is great. Another one that's really good is Shadowhound. The Shadowhound is a 3 cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a 3 cost 3/1 with Stalk, and it can't be targeted by, effects. So like it's concealed and it has to sit there, and you can't deal with it without AoE or some other, exhausting it somehow. And yeah, so she, Hope can just like duplicate, get a 3-die value unit for 1 die, and then swing. And with Stalk, that's really good, controlling the battlefield and so on. And sort of another subtle thing too is like if you use Void Pulse and you destroy something, which I'll read it just for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, bring it on.
You play the spell after you declare attackers, and you deal damage to a target unit an opponent controls equal to the number of attacking units. You swing with 3 units, you deal 3 damage. If it destroys the unit, after it's destroyed, you draw 2 cards and then change 2 dice in a target player's pool to the side of your choice.
Wow.
So 1 die, reaction speed. This thing is tremendous value. Just insane.
It's like Crescendo on steroids, right?
Oh yeah, it's like cheaper than Crescendo and card positive and spinning up dice, and you don't have to kill one of your units to use it or deal damage to use it. It's kind of wild. But you need to be attacking wide to get value out of it. But yeah, the Shadowhound thing I was going to talk about is drawing cards is great when you're trying to focus books. So if you're trying to get a 3 focused Shadowhound book, drawing into those is excellent. So that's one, and then there's a third one that I think is really kind of solid, and that's Indiglo Creeper, because it's another 2/1 that's balanced around a 2 cost, and you get to cheat it out. When it dies, it creates a seedling, and then you put tokens on the seedling to evolve your seedling. It's like Pokemon, and then you bust out 2 3/2 units that are like temporary, but they just, it's huge damage. And being able to like duplicate an Indiglo Creeper, swing with it, get the value there, maybe Void Pulse, and then when it dies, you get the seedling, so you have another body to block with. Even if you don't, move on to the next stage of that card, it's still just a blocker. It's an O2 blocker that just sits there and does what you want. So like Value Town, achieved. It's like
I was gonna say, it seems like it's good to look at also conjurations that do things when they're destroyed, right? Because like that's a part of Hope's ability too. Like you pulled the Vampire Bat Swarm, which is a great example of when it's destroyed, you're kind of getting around the downside of using Hope's ability. And then the actual evolution tree that you're talking about is taking advantage of that downside, and that the destruction is actually a positive effect for you. It puts a new thing into play, which is solid, right? So that's a really good way of thinking about it. And this gets around the limit on the conjuration itself. So like if you can only have 2 in the bottom corner, and you put a third one in, that's totally fine.
Yeah, so the conjuration count does come into play here. for sure. Like if you already have, three vampire bats out, you can't duplicate another one. You
Okay.
have to have the
Can't get
card
around it.
in your conjuration deck. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, someone in chat, and I can't pronounce her name, Riaf you said Hope 6 Battlefield is coming into consideration now, and that's absolutely key. I think, when looking at Hope in a vacuum, they are incredibly strong. Like, just some of the biggest value for, like, low dice cost in the game. Void Pulse is maybe one of the most pushed cards in the game, just in general. But then you have to think about, like, what we were talking about before with battlefield size. Like, 6 is good, but it's not great, especially when you're talking about creating, multiple units. Like Indoglow Creeper, you're duplicating, and then it's creating another body, and you want to swing wide to get Void Pulse value. So now you're really talking about, like, I need ways to manage my battlefield slots. And so I put cards like Blood Chains in my deck because I need to, like, kill my own units. Like, I need them to die. And another thing that's just, as you play more competitive Ashes, you'll realize this, is that attacking wide is very risky. Just an incredibly risky line of play in general in this game, because when you attack wide, you give your opponent complete control over what trades that you're making. They get to assign defenders however they want. If you're attacking one unit, you get to pick that. And they can choose to guard if they want, but you get to pick it. So Void Pulse, while incredibly strong value, it does sort of force you into an incredibly risky line of play. And it's kind of easily disruptible too, because all your units you're playing have one life, because you want to be able to, like, duplicate them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of high risk, high reward play. I think that Hope has incredible value, but you do have to kind of work for it. And it's not as easy as it looks on paper.
That's probably why the card is so pushed as it is, in terms of just, like, when you read it, like, the implications, though, like you're talking about, of having a wide battlefield. I mean, that's been my dream many times when I'm building an Ashes deck and trying to play it, and then it's like, but Zach's over there, and it's like, do 1 to this and do 1 to everything and do 3 to that, and it's like, well, I can never get more than 2 or 3 units attacking at a single time, so I can see how this would be a tricky one to actually pull off.
Yeah, there's definitely some nice, like, ways to mitigate that. I think Vampire Bat Swarm is my favorite because it's incredibly difficult to get them off the field.
Yeah.
Like, it does cost a lot of dice, but when you're talking about, like, they're investing almost as much dice as you are to get rid of it, and you're keeping it around, and eventually you will swing, and, when you duplicate, you swing, you only need one other unit on the field to get that group tactics value. So 1 unit plus Vampire Bat Swarm turns it on, and then you're swinging for 7+.
Wow.
Easy. Plus maybe Void Pulsing and doing all that nonsense, clearing a blocker. So yeah, there's a lot of power there. You do have to kind of work for it, for sure.
So in the spirit of what we were talking about with Dimona, of kind of understanding the counter to your strategy and playing into that, playing around it, right? Having a plan. What are the best ways to counter or take advantage of the fact that your opponent is trying to remove a lot of your units so you don't get a big Void Pulse? You talked about one, which is this Vampire Bat Swarm that actively is preventing that strategy from working. Are there other things that Ashes players should consider if they're looking to go wide with units that can take advantage of the fact that, okay, you want to destroy my 1 health unit? Well, I'll do this in response.
Yeah, there are some. I think probably the biggest one is it's subtle and kind of very wide topic that it's kind of hard to nail down shortly and succinctly, but is just sequencing. Like, I've seen so many games, and I've lost many games and won many games just on how you sequence what you're doing. Like, you have the same resources and same cards every game, but sometimes just choosing to do things in a certain order is very big. To like prevent your opponent from wanting to commit their dice too early to killing something, you know? If you
Yeah.
can like, that's it's very subtle. That's one thing. The other thing is like there's some cards that can protect you in this situation. I've seen Nick, actually, the developer, I've played games with him, where he was using Hope with Sacred Ground,
Yeah.
which is a ready spell that gives Armored 1 to your whole board for 1 turn. And all you need is 1 turn. Like, if you summon a Raptor Herder, you get the Herder and the Hatchling, and then you Sacred Ground. They can't be AoE'd now. And next turn, like I said, you only need 2 units, so you duplicate the Raptor Hatchling, swing for 5. Like, that's, very cheap line of play. It only is like 2, like, you have the Sacred Ground on board already, but it's only 2 cards out of hand, 2 dice, and then you're off to the races.
Is there any I think sequencing is like a phenomenal topic for Ashes in general. But since you mentioned it, like I had Brendan on yesterday for Flesh and Blood, and he uses the term heuristic a lot, which I give him a lot of flack for. But is there any like easy to remember like methodology whenever you're approaching sequencing of a given turn of maybe a set of questions that you're asking before you take an action, like any kind of a framework, or I know it's very much in the moment and you have to kind of sort it out as you go, but there's got to be some little helpful tips that you keep in mind across those games.
Yeah, like you said, it's very context sensitive discussion. Like there's a whole lot that goes into Ash's board states get very complex very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things with like another one of those differences between round 1 and the round 2 on that I was talking about earlier. There's 2 phases of the game. In round 1, in a lot of ways, like it's very cerebral because you're trying to figure out what your opponent first fived, and a lot of the mind games take place in that first phase of the game. When you move on to the second phase and onward, anything goes based on what you draw and what your opponent drew. But generally, you're analyzing the board state a little bit differently than like trying to guess what your opponent first fived to not lose. Because round 1, and this is kind of rabbit trailing a little bit.
Yeah,
but
bring it on though.
Round 1,
bring it on.
You want to win round 1. Like you want to be ahead. If you can gain a dice advantage or a board advantage in round 1, that's tremendous. Like that can give you a huge boost to your potential to win. But I don't necessarily think about round 1 in terms of like I need to win round 1. I'm more so thinking I need to not lose round 1. It's like breaking even is fine. If I can break even in round 1, get my board set up the way I want it, and not have given my opponent any advantage, that's fine, because now I'm going into round 2, drawing our cards. It's all a mystery what you draw, and anything goes at that point. But round 1, like, it's kind of a little bit different. And I don't know, maybe I don't know if every Ashes player thinks about it this way, but I tend to think about it in terms of don't lose round 1 is more important than win round 1. Just don't get behind. If you fall behind, you have to work that much harder, make those, value or plays, and like go dice positive in like later rounds to make up for it. If you're just on even ground with your opponent, it's a lot of burden off of your back. But with regards to sequencing, like just think about like what your opponent has available to them dice wise, especially dice powers and stuff. If they have a frog die, like if they can ping something, you need to think about how, like, can I bait that out somehow, or can I wait it out somehow? Like, are they going to spend it eventually? And what would they spend it on? Illusion dice can spin those down. So like if there's a reaction that you're worried about, like a golden veil or something, spinning that down and then doing what you want to do instead of the other way around, that's huge. Sometimes just passing is one of the strongest things that you can do in this game. Like I've won some games just based on like I chose to pass here instead of doing something. Like I'm slightly ahead on dice. It doesn't even have to be a huge advantage, but if I'm slightly ahead on dice and the board state is sort of favorable to me, and there's literally no action I can think of right now that, gives me an advantage, just pass. Like if they pass two, you move to the next round and you have that advantage already. They didn't get to spend, their 10. You only get 10 dice every round. If you're not spending them, you're losing them, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes a pass is just one of the strongest things you can do.
Yeah. Great. That's great advice. Would you be willing to walk us through? You've got Hope here with you. Would you be willing to walk us through your approach to Hope?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a version 2 of this deck. I took a version of this deck to the latest Shuffle Bus tournament, which is still underway. I ended up going 3-3 and did not make cut. There were a couple of things that were couple of like holes in the deck strategy and things that I had some pet cards in there that kind of drug it down a little bit. So this is more optimized version of what I took to that. But going 3-3 is not bad.
How does how do you get involved if anyone's watching? They want to get involved in Shuffle Bus or this higher level competitive play. Like, what should they do?
Just go to the Ashes Discord.
Okay.
And there's a channel for all of our tournament stuff, and Shuffle Bus is listed in there. And it's usually, I think Jesse, he's the lead guy over at Shuffle Bus. They have a challenge or some web-based bracket, and you just sign up. They usually go for a couple months because it's like a game a week type of situation. So I think they've been doing seasonal tournaments. So it's like right now we're in the spring qualifier. But yeah, you just go in there and just sign up for it, really. Submit your deck list, and there's other tournaments too. I mean, it's not just Shuffle Bus. That's kind of the premier one right now, but there's also Ashes International League, which is a closed list event.
Okay.
Where you can change your deck list between games. They don't care so much about enforcing a hard deck list. So, if you want to bring something more experimental, or you're kind of unsure, you don't want to be stuck with the deck for, 6 weeks or whatever, Ashes International League is a great option for you too. And usually they are, they start slightly, different times. So like you can catch one if you miss the other or so on.
Very nice. Awesome. Okay. Hope, let's dive in.
Yeah. So first thing that I think about when I'm building these days is first five. Like, you really want to think about what you want your board to look like, what you want your options to look like going from round to round to round. Your first five is generally setting up your spell board, and having a balance between, if you're playing an aggressive deck, especially having a balance between setting up that spell board and pressuring with like allies and other stuff. But for this deck, I was building around Vampire Bat Swarm. That was my big thing, is like I want to build around this unit. And so that's definitely a first five card, like always. I'm pretty much never not first fiving this card. And when you're building your first five, you're thinking about a couple of things. One of them is just, you want to spend 10 dice in round one. You need to spend 10 dice.
Yeah.
And if you can spend 10 dice on cards, that's best. Like, you can build a first five where you spend 9 dice on cards and then have one floating for like a nature power or something like that. But it's not really what you want to be doing. Matt Bowers, who's one of the best Ashes players in the game, he's, known for frequently talking about, dice or cards are better than dice all the time. Like, if you can play a card or use a dice power, if it's not like significant, if the context of the board state is not saying the dice power is significantly better, play the card, because, they're just getting more value out of your dice that way. So 10 dice in your first five, you have to. If you're not spending those, or you're somehow not getting value out of those, you're falling behind very quickly. So got 2 here. And what I like to do too when I'm building, I don't do this on Ashes.live. I just kind of have to keep tallying in my head. But if I'm building with cards in front of me, it's just set your dice on the card. So you just keep track of it.
Yeah, are you building your first 5 like you're building your first 5 and then seeing what the dice look like and then saying like, this is too weird, I need to swap out? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I already have my dice pool built for this deck, but if I was starting fresh, I would just have all the dice set out in front of me, and just like set the dice on the cards, like look at what your dice spread looks like based on the first 5 you want. If it's a little bit too greedy, you'll know right away. You'll be like, oh, okay. I mean, maybe 6 color is a little bit, you know. But yeah, you're looking at what cards do I want my first 5 and which cards are the most important in the deck that I want to play very often. So I have these 2 here. I also have Ancestor Spirit, which I thought was another. This used to be Salamander Monk in the last version of the deck. And what I was finding with Salamander Monk was that I was running into Clogged Battlefield a lot. Like my opponent just wouldn't kill my monk spirits. They wouldn't kill my, you know. If I killed my monks to get monk spirits, that monk spirit would just be there the whole game, unless I had a way to get rid of it. So if I was playing a game or playing a deck with like a AoE where I could kill my own spirits, then I would consider that maybe instead. But I went with Ancestor Spirit instead because it's another 2/1, which is great for Hope. And it only takes up that 1 slot, and it's, when it dies, it's not going to clog up my battlefield. And also, the Ancestor Spirit has an effect where it comes into play. You get to sort of scry. Like you can draw a card and then put a card at the bottom of your deck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really great for Hope too, because I really value kind of incidental card draw in Hope because I want to hit Void Pulse. This is the reason I'm playing this deck, is duplicate Void Pulse. So like finding these mid-game is really important. And there's even cards I put in here that don't see a lot of competitive play, just so I can do it, like New Ideas. Choose a card in your hand, place it on the bottom of your draw pile, draw 3. A lot of people don't play New Ideas, and there's an argument to be made that this could be a better card in my deck, but I just really, really value filtering for these power cards like this and Sleeping Widows. Like, I want these all the time.
Yeah, it's because you had a new idea. It's perfect.
Exactly.
I mean, it literally written right there on
thematic
the card.
and everything. Yeah. So, lastly, and this is another consideration with first 5 is like looking at what's your spell board limit. If you have 5, you can kind of do whatever you want. I mean, like 5 spell board is awesome. It's so flexible. If you have 3 spell board, you have to be a little bit more choosy about what ready spells you're putting in. You really want to make them count. Because if you draw into ones later in the game, you're not going to be able to play them. Whereas with Hope, if I don't first 5 a ready spell, I can draw into it later. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Last book that I have in my first 5 is Lightbringer. It's a really, really good. Any kind of aggressive or tempo-oriented Phoenixborn, Lightbringer is the GOAT, because it forces your opponent to it puts a body on the board, forces your opponent to attack next turn, so they can't do, unless they have like a side action frog to like kill something, they're not going to affect your board at all. They have to do something else. And then, you duplicates online. We only need that one other body. Lightbringer's that one. So, but this is kind of like the core I'm building around here.
And those are all 1 life units, which makes sense with Hope's ability, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. They're all 1 lives. They're all really good targets for duplication. Really, Vampire Bat is the one I'm going for the most, but they're all good targets. And what I've got is 4 dice here. So I've got 6 dice to spend. That's kind of a lot of dice to spend. That's not on the spell board. So you can kind of go a lot of different directions with this. For me, I really like having a knight. Just any kind of knight in my first 5. Both because it can, it's 3 dice spent, but like, especially an alert one, something that gives me a defensive, if I'm going really aggressive, I like to have like 1 defensive unit that's difficult to take out, that they have to think about sinking some dice into killing. Otherwise, it will sit there and just block for me. Provide a lot of value. And there's a lot of different, like what I was talking about with open list. Generally, this was built for open list in mind. So like I'm thinking about like this is my core, my base 3 here. These are pretty much always getting first 5. But what can I do with these 6 dice that gives me dramatically different openings, to play against my opponent? One I think is like Sleeping Widows and Raptor Herder. Like that's, let's just use this as an example.
That's
like this isn't
swarm
really making
opening
the most
right
of my
there.
dice,
That's killer.
Yes. So like this, I'm leaving 2 dice floating here, so we need to think about that.
You told me not to do that just a second ago.
I know, it's bad. Don't. But crucially, if you're trying to do like a swarm opening like this, where you're wanting to swing wide, Vampire Bat Swarm can be a dice sink for you, because
Right.
you need to keep it alive, right? So at least one, if not both of these dice, could be used on just keeping your Vampire Bat out. And as long as your opponent is spending dice to kill them, that's okay with you. You go 1-1, that's fine. I still get to execute on this strategy. I still get to swing big,
Yeah.
So that could be the potential opening here, is like 2 dice to protect Vampire Bat Swarm, and then this massive thing. And this is very swarmy opening. You got potential here for like 2 big swarmy swings. If you can manage to keep one of these alive, like Lightbringer, Vampire Bat Swarm, and then duplicate this swing. And then you've got Raptor Herder with Widows. That's another big swing. This is a lot of damage on the table right here. It's also very easily disrupted if they just go big on removal. Like they just ping away all your stuff. So just something to think about. But another thing that,
tell me this. A lot of people would say, well, Void Pulse is the greatest thing that Hope has. Why are we not first 5ing Void Pulse? What's up with that?
So I go back and forth on whether first 5ing Void Pulse is a good thing. Because again, you want to get ahead or break even in round 1. If you do get disrupted, let's say they're really focused on, tearing apart your board and you can't get that swing in, Void Pulse might lose some value there. Or if they're all running all 1-cost units. I mean, you could do this. You could like have a bunch of floating dice. Let's say you went Raptor Herder Void Pulse, right? So like right now I've got 4 dice floating here. Like you could just use Void Pulse with just a single attack, just 1 unit, kill, a 1 health blocker that they have, draw into 2 cards, and see if you can play those 2 cards with the dice you have left. Maybe you leave like a certain spread of 3 out. So like, okay, generally I can play what I draw here. You can do that. It is a little risky. If you don't draw what if you're not drawing what you want to spend these dice on, then that's kind of rough. But I think that's why I don't like first 5ing Void Pulse with Hope, is just because, I mean, I guess you can go like a Knight situation, have 3 here, and then Raptor Herder. Let's do this. So now, actually here, like that. Or maybe even 2 book. You go 2 book instead. Like, what if we just got rid of that, do Raptor Herder instead? This is why I like doing this, because you can just slide things around and see. So this setup, you only have 2 books, but it is pretty aggressive. You have a Knight to eat most of your dice here. But like, you can Void Pulse earlier in the round, see what you draw, and then like kind of decide with these other dice whether or not you want to spend them on the original first 5 you had, or something that you drew into.
Very cool.
But I just don't like that, because I really like knowing exactly what my first 5 game plan is, and kind of playing around the cards that you draw. That's That's for round 2
There's
onward
some
for me.
variance there. Some might say that you're taking some risks by drawing random cards at the top instead of
Yeah.
actually having them in your hand from the
Yep.
start. Yeah.
But it's Void Pulse. I mean, so there's a potential there. If you're not ready for it, you can go up on dice, killing like a Griffin or a Frostback Bear, for 1 die. You go up on dice. They have to make that deficiency up somehow, but you just drew into more cards, and now you create unpredictability in your first 5. They don't know exactly what you're going for, so I don't know. There's an argument to be made either way.
And the cool thing is too that like you can choose to do this from round to round. Like that's the beauty of the first 5 is it's not set on your list when you submit it. It's like you can just choose 5. So maybe you try this on round 2. Maybe round 8 you're in the finals and everybody's been talking about your list and oh my gosh, you do these vampire bats and this opening's insane. And then you just switch it up on them, and then suddenly you got this big swarm attack, and they were expecting a Sonic Swordsman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that was key to my Herald's success in the last tournament that I played in. But yeah, I think first 5ing removal in general, like for Void Pulse at its heart, it's a removal card. It does kind of enable swinging wide because it kills blockers. But in general, first 5ing removal to me is like a little bit riskier than just playing units.
Yeah.
If your opponent is spending all of their dice and they summon like 6 or 7 units, let's say, there are openings that do that, summon 7 units. If you first 5 Void Pulse and it kills one of those, you know what I mean? Like you only have this, So it is a little risky. I think if you do the Sleeping Widows opening, I think Void Pulse is a good one because you're already spending less dice on your board in general. So you have more dice opened up to spend on cards that you draw. And you're just going you're kind of all in on the aggro game plan there.
Cool. It's just cool to see how they can shift. That's really helpful to see. So once you get set up, this is kind of the heartbeat of the deck, the engine, if you will. This basic, you get your books out and then you try to apply pressure in different ways. Like you said, you can go aggro, or you can plop that Sonic Swordsman down, block things out, get those bunch of units set up, and then have that big Void Pulse turn 2. What else you got in the deck to support your future turns?
Yeah, so future turns, there's a lot to talk about here. One, I think Bloodchains was one that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like, I think that you kind of have to think about ways to deal with Battlefield Clog and Hope. If you don't, if your opponent, if they're just going ham on killing all your stuff to try and normally that's actually okay. You can summon stuff faster than they can deal with it, and you can just keep swarming. But say they, are exhausting stuff instead. Okay, well now I can't just have my foot on the gas the whole time because I run out of battlefield slots. I can't actually create any more units. It's all full. My opponent's not killing anything. They're just stopping me. Or, they're putting up just a bunch of stupid blockers and I just can't get past them or whatever. So being able to use your units, then kill them, then summon something else, really good. And then Bloodchains also just exhausts something on the opponent's side, so you get sort of a key blocker out of the picture. I really like that in this build, especially since we're all pretty heavy in ceremonial. Normally when I'm building, I look at allies and ready spells, or allies and books first before I start thinking about actions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask you on that note, do you kind of have your first 5 vision intact and then you take the dice types that built that first 5 and then start looking at action spells that exist in those dice types?
Yes.
Awesome.
Generally,
that's helpful information.
I'm basing generally I'm building my dice spread around what units I want to play throughout the game. And then you pick your removal and stuff after the fact. Now, there's some things to consider too with that. There's some key removal cards that are locked away in certain dice types. Nature's Wrath. I can't play Nature's Wrath with this dice spread, so that's just something I have to think about. Or I could play Meteor, but I only have with only 2 divine dice and wanting to spend some of those on units. That's part of why I think about units with my dice spread before I think about anything else, because you want to spend your dice on units more often than not. If you put a card in your list thinking like, well, I've got 2 divines, so I'm going to put Meteor in my deck. Well, now you're not summoning any of those units that you put in that cost divine. So I tend to think of it in terms of units first, because it's, generally you're thinking about proactivity more than reactivity in this game.
Totally. Yeah, it's great. That's great. I love it.
So like I'm looking at my these are my allies that I have in the deck. So I'll build out my allies. I've got a couple of fire archers for reach. Because if you're only swinging, and this is another key thing with that Ashes too. Generally, every good deck will sort of have like a main win condition, and they'll branch into one of the other 3. And I think Nick talked about this on your podcast recently.
Yeah,
he said we talked about swinging with units, burn, and mill. That's kind of the holy trinity of
burn
win cons.
Yes, lovely. We just take the numbers and we just lower them. That's what we do. We see
that was on the
play a card.
That was on the drinking list.
Number
too.
Goes down. Was it?
That was on the drinking game list. Was Steven complaining about burn?
I mean, it's my favorite thing. It's like we have built this entire game system, and then what we do is we spin dice, and it just lowers your health number. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it that way if you want. The fact of the matter is, like, the way Ashes works is like if you just focus on one win condition, say it's swinging with units, that's fine and good, but you will come up against decks that can just block you forever, or they exhaust and block you, and if you manage to get in 3 good swings, great. If there's 2 health left on the Phoenixborn and you're locked out, you're dead. You lose, right?
Yeah.
So like, you do kind of have to branch into one of the 2. Like if you're playing a swing deck, we call them swing decks, and I always think of swinging every time now because of you guys.
It's such a weird country song too. It's honestly such a strange song. It's not even really. I don't think it's good by any objective measure, but man, it's catchy, isn't it?
It is. I'm gonna refrain from saying what I just was gonna say about country for fear of the repercussions. But yeah, it's a catchy song. So yeah, like if you're just swinging units, I think you need to branch into either. Well, if I'm playing a long game plan, I need to think about fatigue and maybe have a mill as a backup plan, or have burn, some way to close the game, because you can win with just swinging, or bypassing too is another one. Like if you have some kind of evasion with like Frostback Bear or Archosaurus Mount or something, that works too. It's still kind of in the same vein as swinging units, because they can still interact with it in the same ways, exhausting your stuff. But that is a tool. But yeah, I think I have to have burn in this list a little bit, just to like, even if I come out super strong and swing like ton of like widows and vampire bats, and I get them down to like 1 or whatever, if my board is like all 1 health units and they play an AoE and they blow it up, and suddenly I'm behind on tempo and I can't rebuild it back very easily, I may not be able to close out the game. So Fire Archer is in there for a little bit of reach. I'm running 3 Raptor Herders just because, 1, it's probably pound for pound the best ally in the game for its cost.
I've found is it's really strong because when you play it, it makes another unit.
It does.
That's my favorite thing about it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And the hatchling can be duplicated, which it's crazy to think. Like, one of the biggest weaknesses of Raptor Herder is that, the hatchling does nothing on defense, except for just eat. It just eats a block, or it blocks. It eats an attack, but it doesn't create any positive board advantage, right? Your netting kind of is nothing there because you blocked their attack and they still have the unit. But the weakness of that is that like you need to have a third unit to attack with. You can't just play Raptor Herder and swing for 5.
Yeah.
Well, with hope you can. So yeah, it's really good. I have several knights in this list that colloquially called knights. They're not all knights. We have swordsmen and vampires too. But three cost allies. Knights are really good for diversifying your first 5 because they have a basic cost. It's like a dual class thing, but if you're playing 3 colors, generally, depending on which colors you pick, but generally you'll be able to play 3 different kinds of knights that each use a different combination of your 3 colors and have a basic cost sunk in there. And what I love about that, and I mean, this might just be a sort of a quirk of me. I should have prefaced this whole thing with saying, like, this is the way I build decks. Some players don't do this. Like, some players think differently about deck building and stuff. But, don't at me if you lose building my decks.
Does your buddy Jason do it this way?
That's a good question.
Because I'd like to know, because he built this Cole Dreadlord deck that I've yet to win a game with. So I just kind of need to know what to avoid during the deck building process.
Yeah, don't play Jason's decks. No, I'm just kidding. He and I disagree a lot on, on certain cards and stuff, but also like when I look at his decks, and this maybe is just a testament to how great Ashes is in like allowing self-expression in your deck building. Sometimes I can tell a deck list just by looking at it, like who built it. Like I'd just be like, oh, this totally looks like a Impossible German list. Like, look at the ally count. He's only running 6 allies. What a goob, Yeah. I seriously, I think that all the time. Like one thing that's like very obvious about my decks, there's 2. One is I love first 5 pivots, like especially for open list. Like I'll have dramatically different first 5 options. If you can look at a list and see like I have no idea what they're first 5ing right now, I'm like, yes, that's what I want.
Nice.
The other thing is I tend to run between 9 and 11 or whatever allies, no matter what deck I'm playing or what Phoenixborn I'm playing. And that might be a bad habit of mine. I don't know. I just tend to want a diverse, range of allies with lots of different, costs so that I can have as many different first 5s as I am able to. And sometimes it doesn't make sense with like my my battlefield or spellboard or whatever. It's like, why are you running so many allies? It's you've got all this room for books. I don't know. I just do it.
A lot of different ideas, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like running different knights, like as many different kinds of knights as I can in my list, just so I can like have a really diverse first 5s. If I want my opponent thinks like, oh, Sonic Swordsman, that's the only knight in your list, kind of narrows down what your first 5s might look like. Whereas if I'm running Grave Knight, well, now I get first player, Grave Knight, deal with it, or take 4.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite openings, actually.
Yeah.
But
and then
that's.
You said Fire Archer for Reach. So Reach is the concept you're talking about in terms of if my main game plan has mainly worked, but then has suddenly gotten blocked off, I need some mechanism to kind of go that last quarter mile of the marathon, basically. And so Fire Archer is like the last bit achieved.
Sort of, yes. But also, like, so how in Flesh and Blood you get like to like 10 life or below and the whole game changes?
Yeah. Totally.
What you can or can't block becomes like a whole different question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very similar in Ashes, where like doing incidental damage, that they can't interact with throughout the game, bringing their life total down. Suddenly it makes your Sonic Swordsman's like way better, because if you're pressuring your opponent's guard and you're swinging 3 damage or they lose their unit, well, early game 3 damage is like, well, I'm going to take it. Like Sonic Swordsman hits face more than probably any other unit in the game, just because people don't want it to go off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they do not want this unit. They don't want the Sonic Pulse to trigger.
Yeah.
Well, that's a non-issue early in the game when you have plenty of life. If you're down to like 4, or really the magic number in this game is 3 because of Molten Gold. Like you don't want to get down below 3 life against, or to 3 life against nature. Like if they have 2 nature dice, that's just a meditate and you're dead. You know.
We love it. It's my favorite thing about the game too. It's great.
Right. Yeah, like it or not, it is definitely part of the experience for sure. You have to think about it. Although there are cards to counter that. You know, if you want to go that route, Vanish has been slowly creeping up on people in the competitive meta. People are saying, you know what, we should play more Vanish because it just when you take damage from a spell or ability, you can like cancel it type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are heavily considering that. But yeah, I've got. Last ally I've got is a Shepherd of Lost Souls, just because it's a 1/1 grab a knight from my discard pile, or a Raptor Herder or something. It's just recursion. If I'm in Divine, I like to have this around. And then now that I look at my spread of units here, I'm like, okay, well this is what I'm summoning throughout the game. I guess Sleeping Widows kind of counts as units. It's a reaction spell, but it summons units.
Yeah.
So we'll put that out there too.
So this is essentially your battlefield presence. Is it? This is everything you're going to see.
This is my battlefield presence. Yep, and it heavily influences my dice spread, and what like types of what the color of my battlefield it looks like. You know, what kind of flavor thing I have going on here, and it's really clear just from looking at all this that like this is a very swarmy, wide attacking list that tries to overwhelm with tempo. Sleeping Widows being a huge tempo card. Raptor Herder, sort of, because it puts 2 units out for 1. Vampire Bat, because it replaces itself constantly. And then Duplicate, to put out more of them.
Yeah.
So it's just, all across the board is just kind of tempo aggro thing. With the Knights being sort of a, just good value units to kind of hold the anchor, I guess. Anchor down the list. Hold the anchor is not a turn of phrase.
Yeah, you also necessarily want to just completely be a hose to Nature's Wrath or something. So it's good to have a body there that can stay in the game.
Yeah, for sure. And then other centerpieces of the deck, like we talked about Blood Chains. Like I think you have to think about removal when you're building a deck list.
How many cards?
You can
How many
go
removal cards?
How many removal cards? That is.
Tell me the
question.
black and white answer. I know that there's only one answer. Is the right number? What is that number?
There. 3. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. There is no really good number. It kind of depends. It depends on what Phoenixborn you're playing. Like some Phoenixborn have removal cards for their, as their signature card. So you can kind of, and you also have to think about tall removal versus wide removal, AOE versus a Fester. Generally it's a good idea to have a little bit of both. But if you don't have that in your color spread, I don't have access to good AOE in this color spread really, so I kind of have to think about, well, in this deck in particular, you're attacking with so many units going wide that it kind of functions like you force your opponent to block with some of their units, so some of them are going to die. So there's that to think about too.
I was going to say,
you do need some.
Do you typically value removal a little bit less whenever you're on an overwhelm strategy? Because the idea is basically it's not that there's one thing in my way that I'm worried about. It's if there's one thing in the way, I'm swinging with 7 things. So it can block one of my little units, but otherwise I can overwhelm it.
Mm-hmm. It's maybe a little bit less of a concern if you're kind of hyper aggressive, I guess, and wanting to end the game quickly. So, yeah. But yeah, there's a little bit of removal in here. I like Sympathy Pain quite a lot. This is it's one of the best reactions in the game. Just because you're going to take damage, and it can function dual purpose as either removal or burn when you need it to be. So if you're in Sympathy, I think you really need to consider running that anytime you're in it. It's just really good. So this one kind of functions two ways. It's like, this is my removal and it's my reach.
Okay.
I have Chant of Revenge in here, and that's... Yeah, I mean, we can... I still haven't decided whether or not I like this better than Final Cry.
Okay.
With Hope, she tends to want to run a lot of reactions. Sleeping Widows and Sympathy Pain and Void Pulse and Crescendo is a big one. I'm not running Crescendo, but I get a little bit worried about running more than like between 6 and 8 reactions in a list, because it's just starting to push into like, if I draw a bunch of reactions, I'm not advancing my board state.
Yeah.
And who knows if I hit the triggers for them all, and maybe it's the same triggering conditions. Like, I like to have a kind of a mix of different triggering conditions with my reactions, so I can play them, have opportunities to play them, more opportunities to play them throughout a round.
And I think that's notable, right? Because the change in Ashes Reborn is 1 reaction per event, basically. So like, if a unit's destroyed, you can't drop 3 reactions to that. You can only drop that 1, which is why you say that. I also think that Chant of Revenge is interesting here because in the precons, you're kind of trained to think in terms of my ready spells are what I'm doing at the first 5 step. And then after that, I'm playing the game with those in play. So you're not uncomfortable with adding spellboard cards into the main deck and not first 5 of them. I think that is often a confusion point for newer players, asking like, well, I thought, but if I want this on the board the whole time, why wouldn't I play it at the beginning of the game? So what's the thinking behind spellboard cards in deck?
Yeah, so it kind of like, it depends on when you want to have access to them, I think. Like, and the Chant of Revenge is maybe a really good example of this. Like, if you're including Chant of Revenge in your deck over Final Cry, you're expecting that you will get as much or more burn out of Chant of Revenge triggers than you will out of Final Cry trigger once, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where this is maybe not the best card to have in the list, and this might be one of those things that I eventually take out. I wanted to experiment with it because I have 5 spellboard. So if I draw into it early, I can put it down and not think about it, and it might generate 2 or 3 over the course of the game. But it also might not. And if it doesn't generate more than 2, then why am I including this over Final Cry, which does 2 damage all at once and can happen like to close out a game really quickly, and I don't have to worry about whether my allies die to get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of those things that I think you just have to test it. I mean, we were gonna hit this wall eventually in deck building discussions. You have to just test stuff and try it out and see.
Yeah.
I think Chant of Revenge is maybe one of the most removable cards from this list. Like, you could easily slot in Final Cry or some other thing, maybe even more Fire Archer or whatever else. Like, yeah.
Cool. Makes
total
sense.
I have it in here just to experiment. I hate letting spellboard go to waste. I don't know why. It's just this is probably one of my weaknesses as a player. Is like there's other really, really good Ashes players in the Discord. They're just like, you don't have to make full use of a spellboard. You could just play a Phoenix Born because their ability and their signature card's good, and just run 2 ready spells. I'm like, no, there's 5
potential energy.
Yeah,
I feel you on that.
I don't know, maybe I like playing Ramp and other card games too, so maybe that's why. This is like the Ashes version of Ramp. It's having a high spell board, but I don't know. I have the new ideas I told you about earlier.
That's essentially like
just
a utility
filter
slot. Yeah, filter, utility.
Kind of a utility slot. Yeah, I mean, I should mention too, actually, before we get to this. This is 25 right here. So like the last 5 cards in your deck, this is generally where you start hitting the point where you're thinking, what are those utility cards? What are those tech cards that I need to include? Right? And this is where you can start thinking about specific matchups. For instance, I'm running 1 choke in my list. That's a card that I could first 5 against Phoenix Born with like really problematic abilities. Something like Coal. Cole is a nightmare for this deck because of how he could just ping everything away with side actions. It's kind of a problem, and just being able to turn Cole off early in the game is really nice. And it also does a damage, so it's reach too. That's
Yeah.
one. Another one is Law of Sight. This is kind of experimental ground, but Brennan has become kind of like one of the cornerstone meta decks right now. Just Brennan, hyper aggressive, super burn Brennan, where you die halfway through round 2. One of the key openings that they have access to. Oh yeah, it's well, you just have to play around it in specific ways, and there are ways to play around it without this card. But I wanted to include this just like as a flex first 5 pick, because what it does is it's a ready spell. It says when it comes into play, you draw 2 cards. So right there, that's already good if I'm playing with like a low to the ground cost in my first 5. And then no player could play reactions. So Brennan's biggest opening is like play a Raptor Herder or something, Spirit Burn, create windows on your turn, swing for 6. So you do 2 damage and then you swing for, or like 5 or 6 damage. All Brennan needs really to win a lot of times is just landing that 7 or 8 damage in round 1, and then they can just burn you throughout the rest of the game. They have enough health that they can just tank the hits and then just kill you with burn spells. Law of Sight means 1, you're preventing widows that turn, so they can't. That's 4 damage gone, which 2 dice for 2 dice. You're even on dice there trading, and they don't get to play their card. Like that's the key thing. They don't get to play Sleeping Widows that turn, so they're 1 card and 2 dice in their first 5 down that they didn't get to use. So like, I really like that a lot. And if I draw into it mid game, say I don't first 5 it and I draw into it in round 2, it could prevent 6 or so damage from like Final Cries and Sympathy Pains and so on. Being able to swing and not worry about Sympathy Pain closing a game, another big one. So yeah, I think Law of Sight's pretty solid tech piece against Brennan.
I love so much these last 5 like tech meta slots, and notably that Hope. That's where you see that spellboard start to actually be really relevant too. Is that spellboard of 5 means that Law of Sight is a fine tech piece to bring in. Like some Phoenixborn, like Dimona, spellboard 3, like you're probably full, so you can't just bring Law of Sight in case you come up against Brennan.
Even if you wanted to, like you can't meditate away the ready spell and play Law of Sight in the same turn because it's a side action.
Yeah.
So having a 4th spot open or 5th spot open is really good there. And then, the new idea is kind of, I could maybe just run 1 instead. That's one where I'm kind of still flexible on that. And then Guilt Link is my last one, which is another ready spell that like, I could first 5 it, but it's just like a good kind of removal spell that kind of counters big, tall decks in a way if I wanted to do that. So yeah, that's kind of the whole list. Like backbone of it is ready spells and allies. That determines your dice spread for the most part. You pick your first 5s that you want to go with and you build around that. You flesh out the mid game with like the cards you want to see most often and like what your removal is and what your extra allies are to keep, backing up that original game plan. And then you have your tech slots for certain matchups. That's kind of how it goes for me building.
That's so helpful to see it on the table. Is there, most card games is kind of it's an obvious decision to always run the max copies of anything that's good enough to be in your deck, right? So aside from, I know you have some tech pieces that you might first 5 in, and those are fine one-ofs, but, you got 2 of like, the Sympathy Pain, 2 Fire Archers, there's a lot of 2 of cards floating around. Why, like, as a player who might be coming from other card games where that's kind of a crazy decision, like why run 2 of so many different things instead of 3 of like your primary game plan and make sure that you can get that done?
That's a really good question. Actually, But real quick, before I answer that or go into that, we should have a water break.
Okay, yeah, I
Hide
agree.
your brain.
Hydrolyte.
Both because you need a water break and because I need to go to the restroom. Quick.
All right, yeah, go for it.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, I'll talk about the chat here for a second. Here, I'll zoom out. We'll come back to Jeremy here in a second. Well, how's everybody doing out there? I hope you're doing well. It's funny to see the difference. So when we're on the main shot, we've got the Fuji's as our main cameras, and Jonathan hasn't gotten in here to really like color grade these since we made a lot of switches. So it looks really like, it's almost like flat cinematic, like that. I won't say cinematic, maybe that's a little overborne, but it's got that kind of flat look to it. Like, look at me, I'm in a short film about Ashes and trading card games. So it's funny for me to see that on the monitor whenever I zoom out, because when I'm on the webcam, it's like way more like saturated and color rich. Anybody have any questions too while we're here? Jeremy will come back. I think this has been so enlightening for me as like a mid-tier Ashes player, which I assume there's some folks watching that are in that same camp. But if there's anything that's not clear or anything that you want clarification on, I can ask Jeremy that when we get back. And then we'll go into this Dimona deck, see how that one turns out, and then we'll get out of here. And then catching up with everybody here in the chat, it's so funny. I didn't even realize that burn rule was a thing, so I'm happy to play into character on that. I'll try not to abuse that now that I know. Reef to Sag says you only have a 25 card deck basically, which is accurate. So I like that. All right, I'm coming back to you, Jeremy. Here, let's get back in the game.
Hello.
EA Sports.
Okay. Apologize for that.
No worries.
Yeah.
We do that all the time. Zach and I both.
That's the joys of live streaming.
Yeah, I mean we're live. We're on we're 2.5 hours in? No, 1:30, 2:30,
Yeah.
1.5 hours.
Wild. It felt like 10 minutes to me.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously.
Yeah, this stuff flows
Crazy.
by. It's insane.
So you asked about card count, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Why 3
so
O's,
in
why 2
Ashes-
O's,
Yes. So generally, with ready spells, you will go 1 or 3. You basically never go 2. Generally, just because, like, if you want to focus a book, you want to see that spell as early as you can. So running 3 copies is kind of what you're looking for. If you run 2, like if you miss drawing that one book or whatever, then you don't get any focus at all, and it's just like that could have been any card in your deck. Why would you want it to be, it could be an ally that you could pull out of the discard pile. Like if you really want to see 2 ready spells or you want to start focusing, just run 3.
Yeah.
Or just run 1. And this is a huge point because I see new players all the time. And maybe it's just a habit from other card games or something, but I'll look at their deck list and they have like 2 copies of Summon Blue Jaguar, 2 copies of Butterfly Monk, 3 copies of Frostback Bear. It's like you for one, you can first 5 them, have access to those units from round 1, and then you kind of want more variety in your later draws to deal with different situations. 2, you may not even be able to use all those books. You may not have the battlefield space, you may not have the dice, turn after turn. If you have 3 copies of Summon Vampire Bat Swarm in your deck and you draw into all of them, like, you're not going to summon Vampire Bat Swarm 3 times every turn.
Sure.
So you kind of need to think about your spell board as an extension of your hand for the rest of the game. It's something that you want to have in your hand every single turn. You don't want to have 2 or 3 copies of Frostback Bear in your hand every single turn.
Yeah.
It's just, you're not going to play them all. And in particular, the book tax on that, the frog diet cost to put into play, really, it's problematic. So
Yeah.
that's with ready spells. Everything else, it's a little bit more like other card games with non-ready spells. It's like, do I want to see this every single game? Am I wanting to play this as often as I draw it? 3 copies. Like Sleeping Widows. sort of a backbone card for this deck. It's extremely powerful. I basically never want to not play Widows. If I have it in my hand, I'm always playing it if I can help it.
Yeah.
Unless I'm put in a situation where my opponent's dictating the plays and like there's just really no good opportunity to, you know. Same thing with Void Pulse. It's a card that I want to play every single time I see it. Blood Chains is not a card I want to play every single time I see it. However, it's addressing one of the weaknesses in my deck, for one, which is that I need to care about managing my battlefield slots. So I need to open those up. I need to kill exhausted units. And if my opponent's not going to do it for me, I got to do it. And it also functions on a separate axis as like pseudo removal. It's temporary, but if you think about the fact that like an Ashes game on average will only last like 3 rounds or maybe 4. So when you're pushing into late game, 4 rounds plus, that's the territory of like control decks and stuff. So like 1 round where a unit's not doing anything, that's huge. It's functional removal at some point, you know, just taking a unit out of the picture there. So I'm running 3 of those. With other stuff like Sympathy Pain, you know, I need it to close out the game and it's good removal. I could probably run 3 of them. I don't have to necessarily. It's not like a cornerstone of my deck strategy. And same with like comparing Fire Archer to Raptor Herder. Like Raptor Herder has synergy with my duplicate ability. It's something that it's cheap. I generally want to jam it out as often as I see it. I want to get good value out of these, and I'm going to play 3 of them. Fire Archer, no synergy with my ability. It's kind of just reach. It's a little bit of reach that I need for closing out a game. But generally speaking, it doesn't provide a ton of value on the battlefield. Easy for them to get rid of. But I do want 2 of them as opposed to 1 because I'm running a lot of ceremonial. So if I'm looking to like close out a game and I just need those last couple damage, I can resort to using ceremonial die to pull 1 back. And as long as I'm ahead on life, right? I can do that a couple of times a turn.
Yeah.
But I need at least one to be in my discard pile. So like running 2 as opposed to 1 is more likely that it'll be either in my hand or discard pile when I need it. So
yeah, makes sense. So your again, your cornerstone cards are 3. Your tech first 5 cards usually 1, and then anything that can kind of serve as a I want it but I don't need to see it is in the 2 of slot. And I think you have a lot of cards like even Sympathy Pain and Fire Archer that are kind of in the same Enchanted Revenge. It's kind of in this like axis of this secondary win condition, and they all kind of do it slightly differently. And there's not a clear winner for your deck. Like it depends on your opponent and when you draw them. So you're just kind of giving yourself a chance for the right cards to line up at the right time. And if they don't, you still get value out of what you draw.
Yeah, like that's exactly it. Ashes is generally speaking like a very low variance game. In so many ways, it's one of the lowest variance card games out there. But the draws do matter. Drawing things at the right time and stuff, that doesn't change. It's still a card game. So, a lot of I would say your first draft of a deck is going to look like, like there's going to be some flex going on. Like this stuff, you really want to nail down your core. This is kind of the core of the deck. Now I've got 9 or 10 slots here that I can use to like make the deck better, adjust the different levels of removal and burn and whatever else I need, additional units, which allies are best. And then like the last 5 cards or so are like those tech pieces where you're looking to like counter certain decks or strategies that shore up your weaknesses or lean into your strengths, one or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. I feel like I would be a much better deck builder after hearing this explanation. Even this idea that I start with a Phoenixborn and then I go to my collection and I look at what possible first 5s would create like a powerful board state and engine for this Phoenixborn moving forward over the course of the game. and then saying
Yeah.
like, okay, here are the options, and then here are the dice that involve, and then you start to kind of be like, okay, if I go with this first 5-ish engine, then I kind of lock my dice in there, and now I can go look at the rest of the action spells and whatnot to find out what becomes available to me within this first 5 that I've created. That is like so much less intimidating than starting from scratch and being like, okay, what are the 30 cards? I need to figure out on this.
Oh, dude, if it's sitting down to build an Ashes deck and you're thinking in terms of 30 cards and 10 dice, like, whew, this game, it gets really crazy. Which, thing is, though, a lot of times other card games are like that.
Yeah.
You're thinking about, what resources like you want, and like you're picking like all these cards. And it's really just like, again, I would encourage new players to think about Ashes in terms of round 1 and round 2 onward being sort of different phases of the game. And when you're sitting down to build the core of your deck, think about round 1 more than anything else.
Very cool. Love it.
Because if you can get round 1 down, get your dice spread solid, then you can start thinking about how to flesh it out after that.
Yeah. Way better approach. Shout out to Hubu here on the chat, popping in to say hi. Waiting on my AshCon 2 matchups to respond. I hope all is well with y'all. So good to see you.
Nice. Yeah, AshCon 2 is happening right now this week.
Yeah. So what is tell us about AshCon 2?
Oh, so this is a Plaid Hat official event. They did it last year with the release of I think it was Lulu and Warwick? I can't remember. But they're planning on doing AshCon with every new release now, is what they told us. So it's an online event. It's being done over Ashteki. It's an official Plaid Hat game event, so there are official prizes and stuff, promos, and right now there's some translucent dice on the line, which are really cool. And it's super easy to sign up. Like, it's just signing up in like a Google Doc form basically, and make a Discord account, get onto Discord, get in there to play some games, and you'll be put in pods with other players, and you just have to play one game against each of your opponents. And yeah, it's great. It's really fun. It's brought in a lot of people, I think, into the online community who were maybe just, playing Ashes in person at the kitchen table or whatever. We see last time this happened and this week, we've seen a lot of new people come in and playing the game online that we're not playing before. So, and I have to say too, like, it's very, very, very cool to see Plaid Hat officially sponsoring or like endorsing, rather, is what I'm looking for. Endorsing like community resources.
Yeah.
Ashteki, Ashes Live, like the Discord, the Ashes community Discord. Like, none of this is official Plaid Hat stuff. It's all run by players. But they're saying, like, you know what? You guys are putting in a lot of work to like developing this community and making this game happen and keeping it vibrant and fresh. Like, we want to show you that we care about that. So like, we're going to use your tools and stuff to play the game. That's just awesome.
Yeah, that's great. And it's free.
It's free. No money.
It's free. No money.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, awesome. So anybody watching that's interesting to you, hop on in AshCon, especially now that you know how to build a deck. From Chaos Theory here.
And if you miss this one, like I said, they plan on doing it with every new release. So yeah.
So we got a lot of the theory with Hope. Do you have a Dimona deck as well?
I don't have one built, but I thought maybe I could walk you through with building one that you wanted to build.
Yeah, let's check it out. Let's look at what might happen. So if we're gonna start with the first 5 on Dimona, we've got 3 spell board. I love that Summon Fallen idea. I would love to play a Fallen deck that actually works. Yeah,
absolutely. It's been one of the builds I think has been seeing the most success. I did throw together a version of this, but I kind of want to just see where your mind takes you.
Okay. Let me get a stack here.
Yeah. So a good place to start, probably, with Fallen. Like, this is one of those situations where you do want all 3 copies out at some point in the game if you can help it. So 3 copies of Fallen is
Yeah.
definitely a good place to start.
I mean, and then you have to ask too, are you going to jump through the hoops to try to get a double book on turn 1? Because that is possible.
Yeah.
I know Ash has a lot of ways to do that. What are your thoughts? I mean, is that worth it, particularly in this case with Dimona?
I think when you're playing Fallen, I don't have a ton of Fallen experience, but from what I know of it, is like, one Fallen book is kind of bad. It's just 1 die for a 1/1 with a niche ability. The ability is like it ignores armor, right? Or it can't be prevented. But basically that means ignores armor. But it also ignores like particle shield and stuff like that, I think. But yeah, it's just a 1/1. It's not that impressive for 1 die.
Not terribly impressive, yeah.
No. So you want 2 books. Like, you really, if you're building around Fallen as sort of a central game plan, you really need 2 books as early as you possibly can. So I do think Open Memories is probably necessary in this deck.
Okay, we're going to do it.
So you do have to factor that in. That is unfortunately 2 dice that you're not spending on developing your board state early on. So actually, here, I'll get this all out too as we go.
And let me, you know what, the live folks will be able to still see my lovely face, but you will not be able to, Jeremy. I'm going to go to the board here.
Take it to the board.
Take it to the board.
Yeah, let me find my... Oh, there's False Demon again. Everyone can take their shots now.
Let's go ahead and build that burn deck while we're at it.
Yeah. I'm gonna mix up my cards really bad here. Okay. Fallen.
Okay. So, what I really want to do is I want to play... Let me get some cards out of the way here. Get this less like psychopath is building here. So I want two Summon Fallen books. Easy.
Yep.
Those... the number of dice to commit to that. I mean, how do you envision the Summon Fallen book? Is it you commit 1 ceremonial first turn, 2 ceremonial?
Yeah. So I think it depends on what the rest of your, again, we're gonna build out our first 5, and we'll see here. I would assume maybe only triggering this 1 time in round 1.
Okay, let's just assume that.
Even like with the 2 books and stuff, like you're probably only triggering it once, maybe not even at all. Honestly, it might just be, setting these up. It kind of depends on, how aggressively your opponent is killing your allies, if at all, and if you want to devote resources in round 1 to killing your own allies to get the tokens. I don't think you need to. I think the whole appeal of Summon Fallen and Dimona is that you put your opponent in that catch-22 where they need to kill your allies because they don't want you to mount, but you will get value out of that happening. You'll generate value. So I would say just commit 1 die to some books for round 1, probably.
All right, I'm going to put a basic ceremonial on Open Memories because we don't know what this color is going to be yet, but it'll be the basic symbol. I'll put it in the bottom right,
Yep.
so it's like, okay, that's a wide open die.
For sure. Yeah, for books that have or cards that have a basic cost, that's a good idea to do. Until you know what that last one's going to be. Where was my Open Memories?
It's probably in another deck you've built.
Alphabet.
It's always in another deck, it's always over there.
Yep.
All right, so that's 2 cards committed to the first 5. Open Memories becomes Summon Fallen, so we've got double book, Open Memories.
Yep.
Summon Fallen, of course, gets better as more are out, so this 3rd copy, I imagine, we can either float in the deck to have a better effect later, or we can say, well, we're just happy summoning 2 zombies every time.
I think that generally people who have played Fallen decks a lot, they tell me like 2 books is good. Like 3 is great. 3 is where you start getting to crazy town with value. But 2 is it's plenty. That's like where the good stuff's at. 2 zombies every time an ally dies for 1 die. Solid.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 3 of our dice. Now, normally this looks kind of scary because It's like, oh, we're spending 2 cards and 3 dice in round 1 for maybe no units. We don't know. Like, there's no units here.
Yeah.
Not really. But with Dimona, we only need 1 ally, and we have like 2 dice we could sink into her for sure.
Oh yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, we need to think about like what allies we want with Dimona. We're already in Ceremonial, and we're already in Charm. So those are good places to look to start. To me, like as far as like cheap allies go, again, I think Enchanted Violinist is like really, really good for Dimona. It kind of does triple duty here. It's like it's removal, it's mill, it's an ally that you can mount, and it's something that your opponent doesn't want to kill because it creates Fallen. Like it's kind of a lot of value there.
Okay, let's start there. Let's go to the. Man, there's so many good ones.
There's a lot of good ones. This is where I always get stuck with deck building, is because I'm like, man, all these allies are so good. I want to run them all. That's why I end up with like 11 in every deck.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay. A lot of different directions to go here too. So I'm gonna start pulling just some knight units too, just so I can see those, see some different looks.
Sure.
And then I will get to, you're in Hearts. You can look at Imperial Ninja, say, oh, well, maybe this is a discardy style deck. Who knows? What's that going to be?
It could be. Yeah, you could go that direction if you want to push heavy into like the mill late game type thing, which Fallen excels at late game. Like I don't think anything really outvalues a Fallen deck in the late game if you can get the 3rd book out and you're just like spamming 1/1s for
the rest of time.
3/1/1s for 1 die. I mean, how do you beat that? It's really strong, and it gives you so many main actions to stall with, and they just have to sit there and like, well,
oops.
I'm gonna catch up on chat while you're grabbing this.
Yeah, please do. We've got.
Yeah. Crazy name Riafduguf says Dimona's promote of an exhausted ally might let you first 5 open memories. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you more ways to spin your dice and reuse the same units. So for sure.
And there's the Enchanted Violinist right there. Okay. So let's throw this out. So Enchanted Violinist comes into play.
Killer Cactus is a great player. Sorry, and he said you want to flex between using Fallen and Promote. So it's good to know. I think Killer Cactus has played this deck before, or built this deck before. Okay. They said that
Dimona's ability basically
fun with Rainbow Dimona without Fallen lately. Huh. Yeah, well, I can see going both ways.
I'm not here to have fun.
Yeah.
So Enchanted Violinist comes in, exhausts, deals a damage, destroys a unit, discards a card, and then can become an Empyrean mount. That I said a lot of things there, and they all sounded very tantalizing. So that's 5-ish dice, 5 to 6. So we could. I mean, we got a spell board of 3. Like, what are we doing with that?
Yeah. So if we're going into allies and we want to make sure we have allies for Fallen and so on, I think we could consider Reinforce.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a good ready spell we can play in round 1 that is kind of card positive, because you're gonna, and as long as we build the deck well, you're gonna hit an ally in those top 5.
Yeah.
Whether or not you'll be able to play it is kind of a different story, and that's one of the things about this. I was playing this deck earlier this week just to test, and like when to reinforce is really interesting. You want to reinforce early in the round because you'll have all your dice available at that point, so you know exactly what you can play and not play. The later you wait to reinforce, the kind of more that just becomes draw 1 random card and you don't care about. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it is something we can think about with Spellboard, I think. The other thing we can think about, I think, we need to think about like high value conjurations, because Fallen probably not happening in round 1. If it is, it may, it's going to happen late in the round. But like, may or may not spend dice on this book. We're definitely spending dice on Open Memories, but like, we need to make the rest of these count. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, if we're spending a card and 2 dice on doing basically nothing but focusing this, then we need the rest of this to like really punch.
Yeah.
So when I think about high value conjurations, I'm thinking like Frostback Bear or Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
Frostback Bear, unfortunately, has the problem of being in round 1 a 3-die 2/3, which is problematic. If you have spare dice already, that's fine. If you where we're at right now and looking at the colors we're looking at, I'm not sure. Do you have Divine on your Dimona?
I do, just as a basic placeholder.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I think that's a good direction to go. I think Griffin is a really solid 2-cost potential book to have in there. It's gonna pull a lot of weight, unless they are doing Ice Trap in their first 5. But
who can anticipate that?
I mean, it's becoming more and more common. Griffin's kind of the conjuration to beat right now. But we could also look at a potential 2-night type of opening, like a double night opening.
I was super into that. I was starting to think about that myself. So even Violinist, I feel like, is the kind of unit that's good kind of throughout the game as you draw it.
Maybe not in first 5 though.
Yeah, but so Reinforce seems like it's going to be pretty important for the overall game plan of kind of constantly making sure we have allies, and so we can always use Dimona's ability if we need to. But putting 2 high beef units here seems really good.
Yeah, definitely could be. This does... So what I've noticed with double night openings, because I do this a lot, I like to have a pivot where I have one opening where I do maybe something a little bit more wide, and then one where I have a double night threat. And this is just me. I just want to preface this with this is just something I like to do a lot. But the reason I like it is because including removal in your first 5 is generally risky.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the right type of removal, then it might be not as good of a card. It's also not advancing your board state. It's only dealing with your opponents. Every removal card you include in your first 5 is a unit you're not playing, right?
Yeah.
So if you include 2 knights and they include Fester, they can ping and Fester one of them, and then you have another one, and it's they probably won't include enough removal in their first 5 to deal with both knights. And since knights tend to generate a card advantage situation because of how beefy they are and how with alert and stuff like that, how hard they are to kill, you can kind of make up for it. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So I really like it. It just depends on the dice spread, what's available to you. I generally like to have at least one of those knights be the 4 health alert ones if I can help it, because Hammer Knight and Sonic Swordsman are they're really good on offense and defense.
I was just about to grab.
Stuff I like the Grave Knight that you had there. I really like opening Grave Knight, but it might be a little too aggressive. Maybe we'll see for what we're trying to do.
Too aggressive.
It also gets eaten by. Well, it gets eaten by Griffin is the problem. You throw it down, and if you're going first, it's not a problem. But if you're going second,
you're talking like somebody who knows the metagame right now.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to bridge the gap,
Absolutely.
Between,
And ultimately, that's why you're saying Griffin is making such a splash, right? Because it's an instant answer for 2 dice to a 3-die, 3 health knight.
Yep. Yeah,
that
and
makes total sense.
it's just really, it's a powerhouse aggressive unit, and if you're not running Ice Trap or Aerodel or something like that, it can be tricky to deal with. Like you have to rely on like 2/1 attackers, which for one you have to pressure their guard. Which I guess pressuring their guard is like it's good in general. It's just good to do that. That's a good tip for newer players. Like guard pressure is really strong. As soon as that guard is broken, the world is your oyster. Like you just start taking out units left and right, make the trades you want. As unless they have unit guards, that's and unit guards are getting more popular with Griffin being a thing now too. So
yeah, it's amazing. The
I'm looking at chat to see.
Meta keeps turning. Love to see it.
Yeah. So I know the direction I went with this list. I just want to see where you're going and kind of give comments on that.
So the thing that I can come into here is like any of these knights, we can just imagine this is 3 dice worth of like body. So if we got 3 on a knight, 4 in reinforce, 5, 6 on open memories, 7, 8 on Dimona's ability, we can't really bring in another knight unless we're not using like Dimona's ability or we're not playing reinforce. So we've only got 2 dice floating past this. So that means we can either do like 1 on assume like Summon Fallen's going to happen, and then 1 on something else like Raptor Herder to get some bodies on the table and to increase the odds that I can actually use the Summon Fallen ability by Raptor Herder getting destroyed. This is also a fine unit to put Empyrean mount, and it comes back in and it generates another little Raptor man. Which is great, right? So that's a 1 die more like kind of Fallen driven moment. Or you could start looking at 2 dice units that might be relevant, like 2 dice allies. You could also swap in the Enchanted Violinist for the Raptor Herder as a more like kind of, I want this unit on the board. I want to cycle it with ceremonial dice and kind of make this one of my primary little engines ticking in the background. So then it really, to me, is kind of like, well, what 2 die allies, are there any 2 die allies that are worth considering here in this kind of a build? So that's kind of what I'm looking at now.
Yeah, so I think when you're in Charm, if you wanted to, so open memories is going to cost 1. You can stay at 1 charm die if you want, and just use that charm for Enchanted Violinist throughout the rest of the game. If you do that, you're only wanting 1 charm die. If you want to have Enchanted Violinist as a potential first 5 choice, then you have to run 2 charm, right? And if you're running 2 charm, then I think Beast Tamer is a consideration.
Ooh, I love Beast Tamer.
Beast Tamer is a beast. It's just so good on defense, really good on offense too, honestly. But it's a really, really great defensive unit that you can plop down and buy you time to set up these fallen stuff.
Yeah.
It can do a lot for you. Alert block with tame, it takes less damage. So alert block a unit, swing into a unit. Maybe it still survives, and if it does, you promote it. That's kind of crazy.
Let's do that.
Killer Cactus in the chat saying Beast Tamer, Iron Worker, Crimson Bomber, Crystal Archer. Yeah, Crystal Archer is another one. If we go the Griffin route, if we want Griffin as one of our books, I think we have to consider Crystal Archer. It's just too good to not think about. But this is one of the things about running either of these units that I think is tricky, is it kind of forces you into very heavy divine time for your dice spread. So it's just do you want that or not? And do you have the dice for that or not?
Let's go Beast Tamer.
I really like Beast Tamer a lot. I think it's fantastic.
Let's go Beast Tamer plus Knight and then put Violinist in the deck.
Yeah.
You happy with that?
It's a great option. Yeah, for sure. So if we do that, we move Grave Knight down. I've completely stopped caring about my cards. I'm just looking at the screen. Oh, you got a low battery thing.
Yeah, let me grab it real quick.
All right.
Don't want to lose you.
And Monk getting in depth. Heck yeah. This is really fun. That's why I love building decks in this game. This is just like, it's so much fun to build decks. You have so much freedom.
Okay, let's put Beast Tamer up here.
All right.
That's looking exciting.
Well, with that, we'll have a fully assembled first 5. We can start thinking about
What's our knight though? What really is the knight situation here? Is there anything that fits in these dice types? Because like Dimona can be anything.
Right now you have 1 time, 3 charm, and 2 ceremonial.
2 ceremonial, yeah.
Well, but it could be other things, but yeah. I think you need at least probably 2 ceremonial for Fallen, just in case.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 6 dice total now. Yeah, the last color is kind of up to you. Like, you can go 3 color with this, but I think you benefit a lot from having a little bit more choice because ceremonial charm as your base doesn't have, I don't know. I worried about the choices there as far as like a 3-cost unit. It's basically Blood Archer, and Blood Archer is kind of tricky to make work. I think a 4th color is what you're looking for, and it can kind of go a couple different ways. Like you can kind of go like a nature thing, or you can go a divine thing.
You can. Oh yeah, I love nature. Look at this.
Because nature means Hammer Knight, and Hammer Knight's fantastic.
Yeah, Hammer Knight's fantastic, and nature's fantastic.
And oh yeah, Jason's agreeing in the chat. Says I suggest nature. You can grab Hammer Knight, Herder, and Wrath. Yeah, this opens up. Nature opens you up to having great options for removal. AoE removal, especially, is really good because you get to clear out your exhausted Fallen, kill maybe one of your 1-die allies, and clear their board, and then summon more Fallen. So
yeah.
This is already different in the direction I was going, by the way.
Awesome. So then how do we know? I tend to just say all basics be nature until otherwise known, but we can look at how the rest of the deck might form up and then kind of see how we build it, right?
Sure. So yeah, with this first 5 right here, we're looking at we'll have 2 spell board. That's fine with Fallen, honestly. So we're going charm, nature, ceremonial. You got 2 big defensive units to like stall and buy you time, block. And reinforces pulling something that could be an ally you can play, or can be, those dice can be used on promote. I think what we need to look at now is some like alternate first 5s. Like this is a good solid first 5 here. What do we want to have as like a pivot in case we do something different? If you're running 4 nature, honestly, Frostbite Bear is it's pretty good choice.
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
What you would have to do, because it costs 3, we can't cleanly swap in a 3 cost anywhere on this without removing Hammer Knight. But Jason says starting Tamer and Hammer Knight is straight toxic. Yeah, it's really good. Beast Tamer basically functions as a defensive knight in all but cost, really.
Yeah, which is where you want to be, really, right?
Yeah. If you go Frostback Bear, you have to potentially change that Beast Tamer to a Enchanted Violinist, which is fine. Or oh no, you can swap around the one of the nature dice off of Hammer Knight instead.
Oh right.
So yeah,
right.
Yeah. This is why I like that visualization of seeing your dice like on the cards, because it's easier to like move things around.
So let's look at Frostback. Let's actually pull that in. Take a look.
definitely a consideration. I don't know if we want to commit to it just yet. It's just really expensive on dice in round 1, and we're already sinking 2 into open memories. So this could potentially be what I was talking about before, a full pivot. You're just like, no, I'm gonna have Fallen in the list, and against some decks I will go the open memories Fallen route and try and be defensive and set up, or I just go aggression and I just build my Fallen later if I need to as a backup plan. But like I could just go like instead like a full spell board of books and just go like Frostback and what else in this colors? I don't know. Like Ruby Cobra maybe or something. I don't.
There's some weird stuff in these. Even Sunshield Sentry is technically in with that one time die.
I really like Sunshield Sentry as a one of, just in case you're up against something really aggressive.
Let's see what else is in here. That Pain Shaman is kind of an interesting... it does have a come into play effect that you can recur with that, mount it, bring it back in, deal 2 damage, remove 2 wounds from the Phoenixborn kind of situation.
I really like Pain Shaman a lot. Nick Green's saying, if you're playing the long game, take Butterfly Monk instead. Frostback Bear as a flex at best. I agree with that. I think we can run one Bear book just as like a flex open. We have plenty of nature to do it, but like if we're playing for the long game and we're doing the Fallen plan, I think Butterfly Monk is better.
Right,
leave more dice open for allies.
Yeah, and I'm just kind of pulling out stuff that gets my attention that works in these dice types, which is quite nice. So let's look at. Whew, just went past. We've got Guilders. Let's not forget we do have Guilders if you ever want to go that direction.
Guilders. It's primo.
We've got Ash Spirits, of course. Rhino plays into our basic strategy, but probably shouldn't go there now.
Rhino Fallen, the new meta.
You could bring in the Three-Eyed Owls.
I think there might have even been someone on the Dashes Discord recently who said that they pivoted off Fallen with Iron Rhino. Like, that'd be really fun.
I love that. Got the Turtle Guard. It's not really playing into the game here. Here's the Summon Frostbacks. So that's going to be solid. And here's our Butterfly Monks.
Yeah.
Okay, super solid. Any room for, I don't know, Dread Wraith? Probably not making moves here.
Yeah, Dread Wraith's kind of a meme still, unfortunately.
Okay, I think that you got the mind. No, you don't want the Mind Fog, really.
You could lean into Charm a little bit with books if you wanted to like really go for late game and get some burbs. I don't know, but I know how much you like the burbs.
Of course, absolutely love it. Okay, so we could go Butterfly Monk. That's a flex there, and we could go Frostback Bear.
So what I like to do when I have the cards all set out in front of me is like pick which, like treat your 5 cards there in your core first 5 as like columns, and then put the cards you would swap in for that card underneath them as like what am I swapping out, and like create your alternate first 5 below it. That's what I tend to do. Just it helps me visualize a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And
I think you're either going Sentry or Hammer Knight, probably not both. That's fair to say, right?
Yeah, definitely. If Sentry at all, because we also, what is the main engine that we're building here? Is it a Fallen engine first, right? Or is that like before we do anything, we've got allies, Dimona's ability, and Fallen as kind of the perfect trifecta?
Yeah, I think you can like cleanly create first 5s for either situation. I think you could have a Fallen opening and then a completely non-Fallen opening with this with this spread if you wanted to do that.
And what would be the decision point where I would either do one or the other? Like, what would I be looking at in an opponent's list to determine that?
In open list, I think if you see, I would say, because of your two really defensive units there, and being able to like create a lot of 1/1 blockers, potentially Fallen versus like a potentially versus a faster list. I don't know. It just depends on what if they can efficiently kill your knights. I think Fallen's going to be like if you want to win the long game.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a long game list.
Long game.
Okay.
Whereas against something else, maybe you just go more units, just like as many units as you can get on the board type of situation.
Like if I were against a Brennan deck, for instance, and I knew that they were trying to pull this turn 2 nonsense, would Fallen be the right choice for that deck?
No, you will probably die. In fact,
that's a good example.
That's a great example. In recent tournament, Fallen or Brennan had like a really, really good showing with, I think it was JK007 and Asterix. I think they were both on Brennan. But like so many of their matchups in that tournament were like Fallen decks. It just ripped through it. So yeah, against Brennan, you definitely don't want to do this. So against Brennan, I would say like Raptor Herder is a great choice to have. Like, 'cause it creates 2 blockers, and you have the frog dice to like ping away stuff, widows and stuff like that.
All right, so let's throw that even over this kind of Fallen book here.
Yeah.
Or open.
So we have a long game for 5. Let's think about like a more dealing with aggressive decks and maybe pushing back aggressively on our own too.
And I mean, Butterfly Monk does heal you some, right?
It's kind of slow, but yes, it can. The healing is definitely relevant, and the unit guard too is kind of relevant. Butterfly Monk, Raptor Herder leaves a lot of dice open. We're probably promoting with this first 5 pretty much all the time.
Pain Shaman? It's kind of an anti-burn.
I like Pain Shaman, but I don't love it in first 5 just because it's like, it can't really deal with bigger units very well. It's just going to get eaten by Griffin.
Yeah.
And you may not even need to heal by the time you want to play it. You know what I mean? You might still be at full health, and you're like, well, I got to play this Pain Shaman, and then you just leave value on the table.
Nick Green's saying consider 2 dice for recurring Herder and playing it again.
Yeah, that's true too. We could have the ceremonials open for that. Okay. What's going to be the rest of our spell board if we're doing the Butterfly Monk Raptor Herder thing?
I mean, do you think should we just lock Reinforce? Is that like an always Dimona play it? It's got value.
I think so. Yeah. The only time that maybe not is if you do want to flex in Sunshield Sentry in your first 5, which I think you might want to against aggressive decks like Brennan. It could be really good because it's really hard for them to deal with without festering it.
And we could, we do have some basics floating, right? So we've got essentially 4 basics. So if we change one of these, let's say we bring 2 time dice into the party. Now we can have Reinforce and Sunshield if we want. Yeah.
Yeah, that could work.
So that's interesting. So then you kind of... I think
Beast Tamer could probably stay in both too. It's just a really good all-around... But let's think about spellboard though. Like if we're not doing Fallen, I think Fallen can get away with just not using all your spellboard, just because so much of your dice is tied up in setting that up and then just putting as much defense up as you can early on. But if you're not doing that, if you're just trying to go for have a lot of options in the mid game, maybe you want more books. So we need to think about what other books we want. Love having Raptor Herder with 2 guys. So yeah. Yeah, if they kill the Herder, recur and play if they don't promote it. Yeah, that's really good. Raptor Herder is a great option.
Yeah. So Herder comes out. I think
Okay.
Herder's definitely happening.
Yeah, we could, with this dice spread, you could go like for a Frostback Bear plus Mindfog Owl. That's a classic sort of swing strategy. It's called Foggy Bears.
Mm-hmm.
That could be pretty good here as well. Let's see, that's 5 dice in round 1, and then Herder is 6, so it leaves 4 open for like promoting and potentially like a 1 die unit and a knight or something like that.
Yeah, so basically we can swap into... I've got 3 just to keep them easy in the collection. So
Yeah.
we swap in Mindfog Owl, Frostback Bear, Raptor Herder. So if we just look at what that would look like, throw that there, throw this here. This is a basic. Throw this here.
I'm curious now, any of our regular competitive Ashes players in chat, has anyone done a Foggy Bear with a Fallen pivot? I'm curious. This sounds like something someone would have done, but I've not seen one yet. This is kind of a cool direction to go.
And then there's a kind of a tension here, because if this time die is basic, then we can throw this here on the Frostback Bear, and then we have 2 floating for something else they want to pivot into. But we're pretty heavy nature, and the original first 5 doesn't quite have enough nature dice to support what we're up to.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
because
if we do Hammer Knight plus Bear plus Raptor Herder, we're pretty heavy into nature at that point, which is not a problem.
Well, yeah, you'll need 4 total for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 4 is not bad. I think we could stick with 4.
Okay. 4. Ooh, technically...
4.
Yeah,
4,
4.
3, 2, 1 is a pretty... Yeah, we'd have to go 4, 3, 2, 1, I think, with this spread, because we definitely want to have 3 charm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it'd be two ceremonial and 1 time, probably.
Yeah. And then 1 time, yeah. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 dice there on the table. So we've got Herder for 1, Owl for 2, so that's 3. The whole bear package is going to be 3 more for 6.
Yep.
7 on Reinforce, 8, 9 on Beast Tamer. So then we have 1 die open.
So we may want to consider, because we kind of want to leave Promote open as an option in this first 5.
Yeah.
So we may want to consider. We may not have Hammer Knight dice available in this one.
Yeah, and if we drop, it depends on Reinforce or Beast Hammer. We could drop Beast Hammer, have this one floating, and then this becomes, let's say, an Enchanted Violinist here.
Yeah, that's definitely an option.
So that's a doable Reinforce, Violinist, Summon Bear, Summon Owl, Raptor Herder with 2 for Promote, or 2 for Recur Raptor Herder and play, if we want to go that direction instead.
And since we're using the ceremonial dice as basics, like if we wanted to like switch our game plan mid-round, we're like, oh no, we need to just get more units out, then Raptor Herder dies. Instead of playing Reinforce, we can like use the ceremonial recur play or something like that, or instead Promote.
I dig it. Okay,
interesting.
Let's go there.
So EV, $2, Reinforce EV Raptor Herder with Promote as an option, and potential recurring Raptor Herder as an option.
That's right.
That's kind of cool, actually, because this one goes very wide. Whereas Fallen, we're kind of like stacking tall defensive units and building it for a late game. This one, we're just like, hey, you know what? Let's just start swinging.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So this is kind of the more tempo offense kind of situation, and then we can pivot into a we're sinking in for the long game kind of first five.
Yeah, I dig it.
And that does also give us the option, mid game, if it's like, we're not going to be able to close this out in time, we need to start playing defensively, we can start to maybe pivot into finding these fallen books and doing a grindier late game setup.
If it really lasts that long, I think drawing into your fallen books could be a thing. We have to think about the possibility of meditating them away, though. So it's not something we can like really count on if we're not doing the open memories route. But we can. It would be at least be something in the back pocket if we end up drawing into them. It's kind of cool.
So I'm off the bat. I'm saying
this is interesting.
3 herders, 1 mindfog, 1 frostback. Probably I'll just start with 3 violinists. I don't know, that might be too many. 1 reinforce, 1 memories, 2 fallen, 1 tamer, 1-ish hammer knight. Maybe
we might want more than 1, but I think we can start with 1. I usually start with 1 knight just because I know it's a flex first 5 option.
Yeah.
But if it's really good, I know Nick, when he's building decks, he tends to go 3 copies of as many cards as he can while he's first testing them out, and then he'll swap out cards as he optimizes, which is probably a pretty good way to build decks, honestly.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So now we're in our dice now.
Yeah, we're pretty much in there. That's our dice spread locked in.
Okay, so we've locked this. Great.
This is our core, right?
Yep.
This is what we're looking at? Okay, so how many cards do we have here?
6, 8, 9, 10, 14.
14?
14.
Yeah. This is about where I'm at when I start locking in the core deck too. So yeah, let's think about now. This is a good opportunity when we got this locked in. We've got 2 great first 5 options. We've got our dice locked in. We've got the core of our deck, like which allies we want to see. Our units are generally locked in. What we need to think about, I think, right off the bat, is like with so many slots left open, Reinforce needs to hit when we use it.
Yeah.
So we've got 8 allies right now as our count. That's not super high.
Yeah.
I think we need more allies, right?
All
right. Yeah, let's look at more allies.
So let me put my summon books away.
I'm going to pull up Ashes Live so I can keep up with this too.
And then allies right here. All right, so things that we're looking for, we're going to key off of here. Anything that's, obviously just high value stuff is good. But then you also got to look at, coming into play effects are good because you're effectively going to get them twice off of the promote. So that gets interesting. I think Pain Shaman gets interesting to me there. That's a really solid in the dice, 1-to-1 value. Love it.
I love Pain Shaman so much. Like, I think it's really strong card. It's potentially weaker now with Griffin in the field, but it does at least ping the Griffin when it comes into play. So if they don't get that quick strike kill on it, it can trade even with it. Or trade up if you like ping that. You can. I love this too. When you're like really deep into nature, you can like frog ping and then Pain Shaman.
Yeah.
And like just kill it, which is great. Frostfang is another good one too. Like that's a great unit.
Now I assume we might want to run 3 of these Wayward Knights, or some amount of them.
That's actually.
It's a 3/3 basic.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We might need to consult the Dimona experts in the chat with that because my Dimona deck, I only ran 1 of them. Just because
it has her face on the card.
I know. It's so hard. It's hard to not run 3, but they're just so expensive. 3/3 is not like the premier stat line for a card like that. The big draw of it is that it can attack when it's summoned. So if you're facing down like bears or like stuff with 2 attack, then it's good. Like you just plop it down, attack immediately, kill something, get the value, and then promote it next turn if you want to. But that's 5 dice. It's so expensive. So I like having it maybe personally. I like having it as like a 1 or a 2 of, just as a surgical striker. But 3 is kind of expensive to have that many. I don't know.
I'm with you.
What's her ability, Chris? Her ability is you can pay 2 basics as a main action, and you can remove an exhausted ally from play, and you put into play an Empyrean Mount, which it's a 3/3/3, so 3 recover as well. Conjuration, and it's like when it's declared as an attacker, you get to choose which unit they block with. So it's like kind of like a stalk like ability. Killer Cactus says, I think you want at least 2 Raywards. If you don't, I think you should be playing a different Phoenixborn. Well, I trust Cactus.
2 knights.
They kicked my butt in my Ashcon game, so
I trust Cactus.
let's go 2 Raidward, just because we're, yeah.
Okay, so Goron Rock probably not here because the status tokens aren't a big deal.
Yeah.
You've always
I do like your Adept Duelist there. Since we're running the time die and we don't have anything else to spend it on, I like having at least one of those in the list because it's a really great counter to Root Armor.
Yep.
Like a Root Armored Snake, that unit can put in a ton of work against that. We
That
can
sounds
maybe
good.
even consider first 5ing it if we really want to have it as like a tech counter piece or whatever.
Like against Mayoni.
Yeah, against Mayoni.
I don't think this is a living doll kind of situation. And it's funny, once you establish your dice types, it gets way easier.
It's so much easier, right?
Yeah.
It's just the whole process becomes more. To me, it's like freeing. Like you're like, oh, I can actually do this. This is really fun.
Okay.
I used to build decks before without building around first 5s, and it was just like I would get lost. I'd be in the tank for hours, you know?
Yep, I totally know. What do you think about Rising Horde as a general? It's not great for this strategy, but I'm just curious. It's kind of interesting. Do people play this in Fallen decks?
Not in Fallen decks, actually. It's kind of weird. You actually either go Summon Fallen Book or Rising Horde and not both, usually.
Right.
I will say it looks really, really solid with Rowan, the new spoiled Phoenixborn. Like, it's, I mean, you know, you put it out there, it dies, you get 2 Fallen, it goes into Rowan's little side area thing, and he can summon again and kill it immediately, gets 2 more Fallen for 1 die. Like, that's pretty legit.
I've about got everything playable here on the board.
I was gonna say, it looks like you're pulling them all out.
Which is just helpful because you get to actually see your options right in front of you.
Yep.
Which I like quite a bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that is everything. We could, that's everything.
I think so too. I mean, Crimson Bomber and stuff, like, you could, but with only 2 ceremonial and you're not doing Fallen later, like, it's kind of risky. Or greedy, rather, with your dice, but...
All right, so let's start with things that we really like. I really like Pain Shaman. You really like Pain Shaman, so let's have some Pain Shaman.
I agree. I think 3 is probably too much, because if you draw 2 of them, you know, that's all your nature gone, and then you can't bear, you can't ping. So I think that's a good candidate for like a 2 of slot.
Yeah. So I think he will become a 2 of, if not less. Rayward Knight will start at a 2 of because we trust Cactus. All right, so other interesting things. Messenger is a good 1-time die ally. We do have 1 floating. Draws you a card, 1/1 comes into play. That's kind of cool.
Draw potentially more Fallen books.
You can
General draw is not nothing.
put it in, use it, put it on the appear and mount. It comes into play whenever the mount leaves. It draws you another card, so you can start to actually see more cards over the course of the game, which can be helpful.
Right.
Duelists are
Just
great.
just because I've heard you say it a couple times, I want to make sure, like when the mount goes away, the unit has to be played again. It goes to your hand.
Oh, okay,
not
it does
on
go
the
to your
field.
hand. Yeah.
Just a heads up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So not quite as busted, but you can still continue to chain those effects. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah. You still have to pay for them, but you do get to use them again. But with Swift Messenger in particular, that means like with only one time die, if you play it and then that same round it comes back to your hand, you don't have the dice to play it again.
Right. So let's just cut that guy out.
Yeah, that one might be too hard on the dice spread to have in.
Anchornaut?
Anchornaut seems great. Another basic, paying a unit, mount it, like that's really solid. And the 0 attack really isn't much of a downside now because of promote. Like you don't need it to do anything on the battlefield. You just need your opponent not to kill it. Are they really going to spend dice killing your already used Anchornaut and giving you fallen tokens? Like that seems really solid.
No way.
I like one of Ironworker just as like a flex first 5 pick if you really want to like pick a wild first 5 that you weren't really planning for. Like I like it because it's just 2 basics, It's really flexible.
Yeah, it's a super flexible, and it kind of is like I could use Dimona's ability, or I could play an Ironworker, and you can kind of figure out the best spot there. The problem with Anchornaut is how do you get Anchornaut exhausted? You can swing for 0, I guess.
You can, yeah, and actually that's that's kind of like just a free main action, which another thing, like piece of advice I give to new players is don't underestimate the power of a free main action. Like it's just so good, just a delay.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so then
I think we're solid there.
We've got Anchornaut, we've got Ironworker, Adept Duelist, Pain Shaman, Wayward. We could do Beast Tamer. Oh, nice. Beast Tamer, Hammer Knight, Frostfang. Those are okay. And we've got Imperial Ninja. This is so interesting. It's not great, but like it attacks, you mount it, it goes back to your hand, you play it again, it attacks again. We don't have the dice to play it twice. But that could be an entire strategy that you do with Dimona is like just recur these ninjas and keep. That seems like something the monk would do.
It could be. I think that it definitely would be something monk did. Something monk did do to me, I think. But I think we have to be careful with this because when you're looking at the 2 class cards, like the ones that cost the same 2 class, I think you really need to have like. If you're going to include a lot of them, you need to have 4 dice or more, just because it gets so tight on the dice spread if you don't.
Yeah.
I like Beast Tamer as like a first 5 pick, just playing once, or maybe we have 2 Beast Tamers, but like if we start including like 3 or 4 of those with only 3 charm dice, we're going to have some bricked hands, which is not what you want.
So these allies that cost basics actually get quite a bit better because we can always play them. We no matter what we see off reinforced, we can get it on the table.
Yep, that is definitely valuable. I do think. So wait, how many? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 allies locked in. How many cards do we have?
14 is what we started with.
Okay.
And then
I think we probably have room for like 6 more allies probably before we have to start thinking about removal and tech stuff.
Okay. So is that counting the 2 Raywards?
That was not counting the 2 Raid words. Okay. So I would say those take up 2 of them probably.
So 2 Rayward, let's say 2 Pain Shaman. And then we have 2 more slots.
Well, we could probably push it 1 more just so we can have like 2 Anchornauts and a Adept Duelist maybe?
I kind of like that. A Duelist answers some questions.
Maybe 1 Ironworker. What does this look like here with the what's our ally count if we have one iron worker in there too?
2, 4, 6, 8, 11, 14, 15, 16.
So 16 in a 25 card deck with reinforce. Seems like you're going to be able to hit what you're looking for, I think.
Yeah, and some of them will start, so like Beast Tamer, Hammer Knight, so we'll be at 14 on that first 5, and then 14 on the other first 5 too. So 14 to 25, that's really good odds on a 5-card draw.
Sure.
Let's do it. Let's lock it.
Let's do that, and then if we need to prune some for other cards, we can do that.
Done. Allies out. Okay, I have 3 Festers over here, so I'm just going to add those right to the board. Is that wrong?
21 card?
Yes, so right now, let me get these out of here.
Oh, yeah, and if you're in Nature Ceremonial, I think you have to consider Fester. Like, you just have to. It's too good not to.
3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 11, 15, 15, 16. We're at 22 cards here total.
Okay. 22 without any other spells and stuff.
So 8 slots. I'm going to start with 3 Fester because here we are. We have room for ready spells if we want them, technically. Fallen, Bear, Howl. We could look
Might be
at
tricky.
Chant of Revenge.
Oh, Nature's Wrath. I think you have to.
You gotta have Nature's
definitely
Wrath.
consider
Nature's Wrath.
at least 2 or 3 of those.
Let's just get them on it.
Chant of Revenge could go in.
It kind of is playing into the idea, right? If they kill your allies, you could get Fallen, Revenge. If they don't, you can mount them and attack for 3.
Yep. But again, I think we have to ask the same question that I was asking with Hope, which is like, are you going to get more than 2 damage out of them?
Yeah.
And if not, Final Cry is probably better. So.
Yeah, great question. Okay. And then
we also need to think about straining our ceremonial. Like, Fester's fine. But we only have 2 ceremonial,
Yeah.
So Fester's fine. You're probably only going to play one of those in a round. And then if you Fallen, your ceremonial's gone.
Yeah.
So
maybe 2.
What do you think of this? What do you think of instead of Chant of Revenge, we have Sympathy Pain?
Oh yeah.
Uses Charm instead. Immediately active. Oh yeah, Molten Gold is something we have to consider. Probably only 1, maybe 2. But
I'll run 1. I'll get 1 in the pipeline here. One Molten Gold. Let's just do 1 Molten Gold. Because I'm not that kind of
Chris,
person.
thanks for tuning in, man.
Yeah, take care, Chris. Good to see you.
Have a wonderful day. Molten Gold too actually has been kind of, its utility as a removal spell has kind of gone up since Realm Walker is out, since it places wounds. Means it gets around damage prevention stuff.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Just a little side note there.
Just a little. Okay, we've got... No, we don't want Mist Typhoon. We're looking for the Nature's Wrath.
I need
Easy.
to build this with you because I kind of want to play this sometimes.
All right, here's some Nature's Wrath. And then let's get our Sympathy Pain as well. I keep hearing the same spells over and over.
Well, they're good,
It's like there's some that are really good.
Oh man, so sick of hearing about this Command and Conquer card.
Yeah, good cards are good.
Good cards are good. So true.
There's Sympathy Pain. Okay, I mean, there's not... I mean, we could probably... There's going to be some tech slots that we probably discover along the way. But if I'm looking at 8, I'm looking at 2 Fester, 1 Molten, 2 Sympathy, 2 Nature's Wrath.
That's a pretty good spread.
And 1 Final Cry. I don't know.
It's a pretty good spread. Yeah.
It's just these are all very useful and good spells.
They are. And you'll probably notice, as you play, what things you're kind of losing to and what things are problems for you that could be swapped in or out. Oh, what we didn't do, which maybe we're just kind of leaving that off the table then, is Sunshield Sentry as a potential pick, like a flex first 5 pick.
Yeah.
It means we're not playing Reinforced though. So that's up to you if you want to do that. I think you're probably fine with the Hammer Knight Beast Tamer. Honestly, that's probably plenty of defense. Honestly, dude, this looks pretty legit. This looks solid. This is really fun. Like, you know, you got the Fallen package and this kind of like mid-rangey allies swing package. Decent amount of burn, good removal, lots of, and two, Dimona can like rely on her allies for removal a little bit since they have stuff like the battle. What is it? The Empyrean Mount has like the force you to block with something. That's pseudo removal there too.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, I'm good. I'm gonna sleeve this up and have it as my active deck
next week.
Yeah, you know what's gonna happen? I'm gonna first 5 that Adept Duelist, and I'm going to wreck his explosive growth.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, very much so.
Yeah, who's laughing now, bun?
One thing I'll say with this, what was I gonna say? Oh, you might look into, if you can find room for it later. Like if you decide I've got, you know, the ally count's a little high, I'll like lower some of these. You can fit in some like alteration spells, like a root armor or something like that. Like these Dimona signature, the ally, the Wayward Knight, and the Empyrean Mount, they both get pretty beastly with like a root armor on them or some other alteration on them. So.
I could see that on. So Nature's Wrath might actually be less relevant here, because I'm looking at, I've got the 2 Anchornauts, I've got the 3 Violinists that all do the pings, and I've got Nature Dice as well. So the degree to which the 1 wipe on everything, like maybe a 1 of to first 5 against something that I know is like really swarmy, but I feel okay about my ability to ping 1 health units and stay on top of the board. Is there any other consideration for Wrath that makes you like nervous? Clear my own board?
That's the big one, is
Okay.
like clear your own board. If you're exhausted, you know, full exhausted board or whatever, like if you have a bunch of dice left and you can just like Nature's Wrath and then keep summoning units, then it's pretty good. Plus, it gives you fallen counters when you kill your own stuff.
How about Final Cry for root armor?
Yeah, I think you can get rid of the Final Cry. You've got 2 Sympathy, Pain, Molten. Like, I think you could do that.
Let's do it. I love that. It's much cooler.
Root armor is really cool to just have as a 1-of, and if you ever play in an open list format, it's like really unnerving to see a root armor because it's so problematic in first 5 that you have to respect it, but you could just not, like, just don't first 5 it, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Like, but a root armored Hammer Knight does so much work. It really does. It's so annoying. So, well, honestly, this deck looks way better than the one I built. I ended up going like I went Charm Divine, and I ended up going with like Kneel and like more of a mill thing and Generosity, stuff like that, and Orchid Doves. This looks more like my speed, actually, this deck here.
Well,
I like swing units.
You have the full blessing to use it as much as you want. Yeah.
Okay.
Man, thank you.
Thanks. My own homework.
Thanks so much for all the help and for stopping in and really giving so much quality information about Ashes and how to approach the deck building, and then seeing it on the table here. It makes a lot more sense, and I think this video is going to be really helpful to people looking to go from mid-level to like online tournament competitor, hanging with you guys in the actual tournaments. So I think it's got tremendous value. Do you have anything else that you want to say before we get out of here?
Just to, if you're on the edge of the Ashes, sphere, and you're thinking like, man, this game looks really cool, but I'm intimidated by the deck building, intimidated by stuff. Don't be. Like, come into the Ash Discord, talk to us, and like we'll happily help you. Walk you through deck building. There's the adventuring party decks from my friend Jason are excellent to like get your foot in the door competitively. And all of our tournaments, we have new players coming in constantly who are green, novice players coming in and having a great time playing. Don't be intimidated by all the really strong players. Like just come in and have a good time, and we would love to have you for sure.
That's wonderful. I could not echo that more too. That's been my experience as well, just watching how the interactions go. Ashes Reborn continues to be strong. I mean, the subscriber base is super stable, if not growing slightly, and it's just wonderful. I can't. Zach and I are really amped because whenever we just got the plans last week, the revised plans, but like I said, we're working on the third iteration of the store, building it from scratch, and once that's done, the amount of like Ashes gatherings that we can have just like is tremendous. So I hope you'll be there. I hope that all of the nice folks making these decks and helping out with all these community efforts will be there as well. And we can't wait to see it when it happens.
If you do another Ashes weekend, I will drive down for it.
All right.
For sure.
I
would love that.
An official commitment. It's done.
Yeah. And I guess one last plug is First Five Live podcast. Me and my buddy Philly Cheese, we do it. Try to do it every other week. It's kind of slower recently, but we do it live. It's fun to do a podcast live because you can come and interact with us. So go check that out too.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm gonna go back to the main shot, and I just can't thank you enough.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Steven.
All right, man.
See you.
Take care. All right, so there we have it. A wonderful, if you ask me, moment here with Jeremy, also known as Chaos Theory here in the Discord and everywhere else. So thank you guys for joining us, for watching. I think this might be one of the most important and impactful Ashes videos that exists at this point. There probably is not now a better way to go from like beginner intermediate to kind of a higher level Ashes player. So we will be shopping this video around. This is really important. So again, huge thank you to Jeremy, to everybody who plays Ashes, all the subscribers out there. Hugely appreciative of all of you for continuing to love and support this game and keeping it in print through the PDP system on that sub. And look forward to seeing all of you hopefully at a Covenant Tulsa 3.0 soon. Until then, we hope that you'll continue to join us live and play in these online leagues. There's tons. We have ours. We've got the First Five. They do their thing. The Ashes International does their thing. Shuffle Bus does their thing. And there's probably others that I don't even know about. So if you're looking for a game that you can engage with online, that has an extremely dedicated and open and welcoming community, and that has some of the tightest gameplay in the entire trading card game sphere, this is a great one to look at. So we'll catch you guys next time. Hope to see you then. We're off all next week, so don't tune in to nothingness. But that week after, Zach and I will be back, be playing some Blitz, getting ready to go to Vegas for a big Flesh and Blood event. So we hope to see you not next Monday, but Monday after. Take care.